Chapter 31. Gaio 3. Unlike the vengeful spirits that lack a physical body and thus cannot be touched or perceived, some of the entities in Mayhem possess tangible forms. Having a physical form means they can literally be touched. However, even so, the bodies of Mayhem entities, being an amalgamation of negative spiritual energy, are inherently toxic to living humans. As such, even trained diviners find it difficult to handle them with bare hands. Surprisingly, Mok Jong-un caught the armadillo with his bare hands. Is he unaffected? As a diviner who employs the armadillo as a spirit servant, Sak couldn't help but be perplexed. Why? Merely touching the toxic energy is agonizing, yet Mok Jong-un showed no signs of discomfort. Kak kak, oh no. Startled by the armadillo's pained cries, Sak snapped out of her bewilderment. Swiftly, she drew a talisman from her bosom. It was the Imperial Decree Incantation talisman. Chak chak chak. Rapidly forming hand seals with her left hand, she chanted an incantation. By the Jade Emperor's decree, the divine ink spreads like clouds and mist. The Big Dipper aligns as the divine ink swiftly strikes the chaotic world with lightning. Act urgently as if by imperial edict. As soon as the incantation ended, pa kai 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 kai. Arg. Blue sparks flew from the hand grasping the armadillo, and violent convulsions seized Mok Jong-un's body. All humans possess a small amount of lightning energy flowing within them. The Imperial Decree Incantation talisman technique temporarily amplifies this energy to paralyze the target's nerves and induce muscle spasms. Armadillo? Assuming Mok Jong-un would be immobilized by the electric shock, Sak tried to snatch her spirit servant, the armadillo. However, quack. Ka 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 kak. The armadillo writhed in greater agony. What was happening? The Imperial Decree Incantation didn't work. Could it be because he cultivated martial arts? Ordinary people, unless they had a unique constitution, were usually susceptible to exorcism techniques to some degree. However, martial artists who could manipulate Kai sometimes proved resistant to talismans and exorcism techniques. Sak assumed Mok Jong-un, being from a martial arts clan, had naturally cultivated internal energy, rendering him resistant. Of course, contrary to her speculation, Mok Jong-un had not endured through the power of internal energy. Lucky me, it was unintentional. For the briefest moment, Mok Jong-un was paralyzed by the electric shock. However, even in that instant, he maintained ritual of binding, and the temporarily amplified lightning energy in his body surged into his right hand. Seizing that fleeting opportunity, Mok Jong-un instead released the gathered lightning energy into the armadillo. Ka 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 kak. That was the reason for the armadillo's suffering. Gaio. As her spirit servant's agony intensified, the distressed Sak attempted another technique. Rolling up her sleeves, she revealed the talisman of the celestial ox and talisman of the ox dipper talismans attached to her wrists. Ch Warak. From her waist, Sak drew another talisman. It was inscribed with Big Dipper. Biting the edge of the talisman with her mouth, she formed the hand seals. Chak. Face Ox Borrowing Strength technique by chanting the Face Ox Borrowing Strength mantra. This technique temporarily doubled one's strength. Diviners had devised this method to combat monsters and Mayhem entities. When used, it granted immense strength for a brief moment. Great Dipper, lend your power. Heaven Ox, Earth Ox, Dipper Ox, gather the 6 Ding and 6 Jia spirits. Summon great strength. Evil spirit. Huh. Papak, chanting the incantation, Sak hastily leaned back. Demonic monk had suddenly appeared, swinging his skull prayer beads like a weapon at her head. Dodging the attack, she bit her lip. Yellow spirit, when did it? She had forgotten about him while focused on Mok Jong-un. No, she hadn't considered him a significant threat due to his weakened state. Esru Rook. But now his condition seemed to have greatly improved. The wounds on his body had nearly vanished. Strange. No matter how incorporeal a ghost may be, they don't recover this quickly. Though puzzled, Sak prioritized the immediate task of freeing the armadillo from Mok Jong-un's grasp. It was at that very moment. Ka 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 kak. The armadillo's scream rang out. Startled, Sak glanced at the captive armadillo. The armadillo, which had seemed fine just moments ago, had become significantly emaciated. Realizing something was amiss, Sak grew increasingly alarmed. Armadillo? What in the world? He was merely holding its neck, so why was an Mayhem entity like the armadillo in such a state? Its condition was rapidly deteriorating. Panic-stricken, Sak drew a wooden dagger with a talisman attached from her waist, intending to throw it at Mok Jong-un. However, Esru Rook, demonic monk, blocked her path. Sak dashed to the side, forming a hand seal with one hand and chanting an incantation. Sun and moon shine brightly, ghosts and demons follow, 5 directions protect, nothing impossible. But before she could finish, ugh! A tremendous pain seized Sak's chest. Instantly realizing the source of the pain, she gazed at Mok Jong-un and the armadillo. Gee, Gaio! Sak's eyes trembled wildly. The Mayhem armadillo had withered to the point of near death. It could only emit agonized groans, as if on the brink of its last breath. Cack, she couldn't comprehend the situation. It was bizarre enough for an ordinary human to grasp an Mayhem with bare hands, but why was this happening when he wasn't even using any exorcism techniques or spells? Stop it, she cried out in desperation. Mok Jong-un, who had been holding the armadillo's neck as it shriveled to the brink of death, paid no heed to her plea. Instead, he seemed entranced by something. Only Chen could discern the reason behind Mok Jong-un's actions. She could see it clearly. The armadillo's energy, an Mayhem entity, was being absorbed by the ritual of binding technique. The armadillo's demonic energy, being the opposite of life energy, contained the essence of death. Much more, it was merely a means to capture the armadillo. However, as Mok Jong-un began absorbing its energy through ritual of binding, he instantly realized. This Mayhem contained a significantly larger amount of death energy compared to killing a single human. With this quantity, he might be able to immediately secure enough to form a Danjian one. Thus, he continued to drain the armadillo's energy. The armadillo, capable of controlling insects but lacking any other notable physical abilities as an Mayhem, had no means to escape ritual of binding. Uio, completely drained of its energy, the armadillo teetered on the brink of death. At that very moment, Sak dropped to her knees on the ground, her voice filled with anguish as she cried out to Mok Jong-un. Please, let that child go. The armadillo was her precious spirit servant. She couldn't bear to lose a spirit servant that had been with her for 4 years like family. Sak shouted, If you release it, I will abandon the request. Upon hearing those words, Mok Jong-un momentarily paused ritual of binding and turned his head to face her. He gazed at Sak with an intrigued expression. Giving up over something like this, it was unexpected. It wasn't even human, just an Mayhem. He hadn't anticipated her willingness to kneel and beg just to save a spirit servant. Was this bird-beaked creature that precious to her? Smirking, Mok Jong-un spoke to her. You mentioned a request, right? Yes. Whose request was it? She realized her mistake. In her urgency, she had blurted out that she would abandon the request. The most crucial aspect of this matter was to maintain secrecy about the client until the very end, but she had slipped up. I'll ask again. Whose request was it? Reputation was important in this field. Breaching it meant, it seems you don't particularly care about saving this creature. Then, as Mok Jong-un prepared to resume ritual of binding, the hesitant Sak finally answered. Lady Siak, the principal wife of Yon Mok Sword Manor here, requested it. Mok Jong-un smirked at her words. He had already guessed who the client was, so he merely asked to confirm. As expected. Having revealed the client, Sak's expression darkened, likely feeling a sense of self-loathing. Mok Jong-un asked her again, Are you acquainted with the diviner named Myo-sin? Cack. The armadillo, barely clinging to life, cried out in agony once more. Startled by this, Sak spoke. Why, yes. Your responses are slower than I expected. From now on, if there's no answer, I'll just dispose of this thing. Sak gritted her teeth at Mok Jong-un's words. Despite her considerable experience as an diviner, despite her young age, This was an unprecedented situation for her, being threatened using her spirit servant. If the sect leader or other diviners learned of this, they would ridicule her, but for Sack, who had no family, the armadillo and money were her entire life. I'll answer well, so please don't do that. We'll see. I'll continue asking questions, so please provide answers. If you accepted the request, did you receive money? Yes. How much did you receive? 1,000 silver coins. That's a substantial amount. I sense there's more to the exact request details. I was told that if the third young master, Mok Jong-un, had killed people while possessed by an evil spirit, I should forcibly exorcise him. That doesn't seem to be all. They said it didn't matter if he lost his life during the exorcism, and they asked me to obtain a secret manual from you. Aha! Mok Jong-un smirked, as expected. Since they perceived his ability to control a spirit servant as an unknown power, they likely wouldn't take unnecessary risks and would entrust the request to another diviner. Mok Jong-un stared intently at her. Then he asked, "Do you have any companions?" After a momentary hesitation, Sack answered, "Yes." She had considered denying it, but ultimately responded, thinking that if Mok Jong-un knew there were other diviners besides her, he might be more cautious about taking reckless actions. As if her assumption had been correct. So you have companions. Do your companions know that you're currently handling this task? Everyone knows. She immediately replied, thinking it was fortunate. If he was aware of the group's existence, she believed Mok Jong-un would be more prudent, and her prediction seemed somewhat accurate. Things have become quite troublesome. He found it considerably bothersome that she had companions and that they were all aware of her current task. He had killed Myosin, and now another diviner, Sack, had come. If she were to die as well, the likelihood of another diviner seeking him out would be high. Do they also know that the target of the request is me? Yes. Sack thought that if she played her cards right, the situation might be resolved favorably. Although she had promised to abandon the request, this man was extremely dangerous. While her clouded eyes prevented her from accurately assessing him, it seemed he wasn't actually possessed by a ghost, but genuinely controlled it. Is he really using it as a spirit servant? Ghosts serving as spirit servants was an impossibility. For now, she hoped that this man, fearing future repercussions, would release her spirit servant, the armadillo, and herself. At that moment, Mok Jong-un, who had been stroking his chin with his hand, spoke. Well, there's no choice. Phew. Upon hearing those words, she inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness, quack, cack. Suddenly, the armadillo screamed in agony. Sack, startled, cried out. I answered, so why are you doing that? No matter how much I think about it, whether I let you go or not, it seems other diviners will come after me in some way. Am I wrong? Sack couldn't bring herself to answer his question. Even if she wanted to deceive him, this man was too cunning to be easily fooled. Your silence confirms it, Mok Jong-un said with a grin. Then bid farewell to this bird-beaked creature. With those words, Mok Jong-un resumed ritual of binding to absorb the remaining energy from the armadillo. At that moment, Sack's eyes reddened as she shouted, Stop! Stop! I'll do anything, so please don't kill that child. Mok Jong-un's lips curled into a bitter smile at her desperate plea. In the front courtyard of Hyewa Hall, Lady Seok stood with her hands behind her back, waiting endlessly. This time, she had to ensure the matter was handled thoroughly. If that impudent Mok Jong-un truly sided with the second son, Mok Yunpyong, and handed over the secret manual, the situation could be reversed. Therefore, she hoped the diviner named Sack would resolve the issue effectively. Madam, the wind outside is cold. Wouldn't it be better to wait inside? Sowa, one of the maidservants, spoke to her. Lady Seok shook her head. Do you know how things will turn out? If the worst-case scenario unfolded, she intended to handle the aftermath immediately. If it didn't work out, she had to ensure that no one could have it. As she pondered, Ho Ying, the escort warrior, pointed towards the entrance of the hall where Sack was entering. Madam, the diviner is coming. The diviner Sack could be seen there. Ah! Seeing her unharmed, Lady Seok's face brightened. It meant the request had been successfully completed. Congratulations, madam. Don't get ahead of yourself. She believed she should go inside Hyewa Hall and inquire about how the task was accomplished and whether the secret manual was obtained. However, after passing through the entrance, Sak stopped. Lady Siak found it peculiar. As she watched her, it seemed the diviner Sak was taking out some kind of talisman from her bosom. What is she doing? Unable to contain her impatience, Lady Siak gestured for Sak to come closer and said, "What are you doing over there? Come here and talk." Before she could even finish her sentence, the diviner Sak shouted loudly, "Madam, our ghostly spirit pavilion cannot kill young Master Mok Jong-un as per your request." She shouted so loudly that Lady Siak, the escort warrior Hoing, and even the maidservants couldn't hide their bewilderment. What in the world was this supposed to mean? This wench has gone mad, but that wasn't the end of it. Young Master Mok Jong-un is not possessed by an evil spirit. Therefore, do not make such requests to our sect anymore. If you make another request. With those words, the diviner Sak formed hand seals and chanted an incantation. 5 spirits, 2 elements, roam far and wide, appear in all 4 seas, dwell in the small countryside. Sensing something was amiss, the escort warrior Hoing urgently tried to rush forward to seize the diviner Sak. It was at that very moment. Ugh! Ach! The 2 maidservants Lady Siak had brought from her maiden home clutched their chests in agony, suffering. Their faces turned a dark crimson, and the veins on their foreheads swelled as if they were about to burst. Chapter 32, Gaio 4. Arg? Madam, the maidservants wailed in agony. The veins on their faces swelled as if they were about to burst at any moment. You wench! The escort warrior Hoing, even more enraged, tried to rush forward. At that moment, Lady Siak hurriedly shouted, "Hoing, stop!" "Pardon." At her cry, Hoing had to halt after a mere 3 steps. Lady Siak glared at the diviner Sak, who was chanting an incantation, with a gaze filled with resentment. Sak had adeptly grasped her weakness. Lady Siak cherished the maidservants and escort warrior she had brought from her maiden home as much as her own children. They shared the longing for their hometown. However, if she allowed herself to be swayed in this manner, it would only provide an opening for exploitation. Ma, Suk. Lady Siak raised her hand with a face turned cold as ice. It was a gesture telling him not to intervene. Glaring at the diviner Sak as if to kill her, Lady Siak spoke. "Diviner Sak, if you don't stop right now, I swear, I will mobilize all my connections and power to erase you and ghostly spirit pavilion from this world." These words were sincere. Sak had touched something that should never be touched. How dare she not only betray her, but also make her people suffer? Faced with her fury, Sak couldn't hide her bitterness, though she didn't show it outwardly. In the end, things had turned out just as Mok Jong-un wanted. "You said you'd do anything. Surely you can do that much, right?" This was the first time she had encountered someone so cunning. She thought he was a clueless 17-year-old young master, but he turned out to be a little devil. To think he would come up with such a tactic. Because of this, Lady Siak would come to despise her and the ghostly spirit pavilion. No, from ghostly spirit pavilion's perspective, a long-time patron had turned into an enemy. Ha! She let out a deep sigh. She was in no position to worry about the ghostly spirit pavilion. What would happen to her once this truth was revealed? In her attempt to save a single spirit servant, she had violated several of ghostly spirit pavilion's rules. It wouldn't be surprising if she were expelled, exiled, or faced even greater consequences. Is it time to leave? Quack. Biting her lip firmly, Sak stopped chanting the incantation. Then she shouted at Lady Siak, "If you try to pursue and harm me, you will lose your 2 maidservants." This wench dares. Lady Siak's anger reached its peak, but she barely suppressed it. Having witnessed the bizarre power of exorcism techniques that could threaten lives from afar, she couldn't easily dismiss Sak's threat. "Hiam chit." Lady Siak frowned, glancing somewhere. She had heard the sound of many people within the estate rushing towards Hyewa Hall. They were likely the outer court warriors. Finally, Lady Siak, who had been glaring at Sak, made up her mind. "Leave before I change my mind. Hurry." At these words, Sak let out a small sigh of relief. Phew. The technique she had employed was called the 6 men and women servant technique, an exorcism method that could directly harm or control people. Normally, it required a part of the target's body, their date of birth, 6 sacrificial offerings, and 2 talismans. Only when all these were prepared could one perform killing or any other action. What she had used now was merely a temporary application, borrowing the power of a few special talismans and a unique artifact called the Tranquil Bracelet. Rustle. The Tranquil Bracelet hidden in her bosom had shattered, so she could no longer employ the technique. In the end, it had been a kind of gamble. Let's go quickly. If she didn't hurry, she might get caught. Squeak! Carefully opening the door to the medicine hall, the diviner Sak entered. Mok Jong-un, who was sitting on the bed, raised his hand and spoke nonchalantly to her. "Did you do well?" "Yes, I did as you instructed." At her words, Mok Jong-un asked again, "Are you certain about that?" "Yes, young master, I have confirmed it." Sak slightly furrowed her brow and turned her head at the voice coming from behind. The one who answered behind her was none other than the escort guard Go-chan. As expected, he had someone keep an eye on me. Sak clicked her tongue inwardly. Indeed, someone as cunning as him wouldn't leave her unsupervised. However, she didn't particularly care. For the sake of the armadillo, she had accurately followed his instructions. Looking at the emaciated armadillo gasping for breath in Mok Jong-un's right hand, Sak said, "Now please keep your promise." "All right. A promise is a promise." Despite Mok Jong-un's words, Sak remained tense. Although he was younger than her, she had no idea what this man might do. Therefore, she couldn't let her guard down. Holding the armadillo's neck, Mok Jong-un approached her. There's something I want to ask." She flinched. Surely he hadn't changed his mind or was about to say something else, right? She had doubts but tried her best not to show them and spoke. "What is it?" "In that group you belong to, Ghostly Spirit Pavilion, are there others besides you who can control Imimangnyang entities or ghosts as spirit servants, like this armadillo or demonic monk here?" At Mok Jong-un's question, Sak glanced at demonic monk, the yellow spirit. No matter how she looked at it, that ghost undoubtedly belonged to the realm of evil spirits. It was truly incomprehensible. Ghosts are beings that remain in this world driven solely by their obsessions. Therefore, due to their fixation on those obsessions and the grudges they seek to inflict harm with, they cannot be controlled as spirit servants. No, they cannot even become spirit servants. They are merely targets for exorcism. How on earth was that man controlling the yellow spirit as a spirit servant? She couldn't understand it at all. Moreover, wasn't he not even a diviner? "Do you not want to talk about it?" Startled by Mok Jong-un's urging, she quickly answered, "No, that's not it. In the Ghostly Spirit Pavilion, there are 3 diviners, including myself, who can control spirit servants." Well, it will be 2 now. Not only had she violated Ghostly Spirit Pavilion's rules, but she had also made an enemy of the principal wife of Yon Mok Sword Manor. She had no choice but to leave in some way. In the worst case, they might try to kill her or place a curse on her. Anyway, that wasn't important right now. Not that many, I see. Not in the Ghostly Spirit Pavilion, at least. In the Ghostly Spirit Pavilion. Are there other diviner groups, then? At these words, Sak blamed herself inwardly. She had spoken about something she didn't need to mention. If she were to leave Ghostly Spirit Pavilion anyway, she would have to join another group, but it was a mistake. With that, she gave a vague answer. Just as there are many martial arts sects in the Gangho besides Yon Mok Sword Manor, it's the same with diviner groups. Well, that makes sense. Is there anything else you'd like to ask? Can you also tell me what kind of Imimangnyang the other 2 diviners control? Sak truly wanted to click her tongue. This man clearly hadn't let his guard down regarding Ghostly Spirit Pavilion. Not only had he sown discord between that woman, the principal wife who wanted to kill her, and Ghostly Spirit Pavilion, but he also seemed to be preparing countermeasures. She glanced at the armadillo, who was looking at her pitifully in Mok Jong-un's grasp. After a moment of hesitation, she finally spoke. "Go, a diviner who has long served as the sect leader's assistant, controls the demonic bird Go-Jo-One from Mt. Naku as a spirit servant." "What power does that Imimangnyang possess?" "I don't know exactly, but I remember its appearance. It has an eagle-like body with peculiar horns. You're not pretending not to know when you actually do, right? A spirit servant is akin to a secret art for a diviner, so most of them conceal what powers they possess. That was true. Even among diviners, they generally neither reveal nor inquire about each other's exorcism techniques or spirit servants. It was an unspoken rule among them. Nodding his head, Mok Jong-un asked, "What about the other person?" "It's the sect leader of Ghostly Spirit Pavilion. Even I don't know what a Mi-Mang-Nyong the sect leader possesses." "You don't know?" "Yes. However, there's a high probability that they possess a top-tier Mi-Mang-Nyong as a spirit servant. At least, since they are one of the sect leaders of the 64 halls of Fangwon, that's likely the case. 64 pavilions of the directional planes. They were 64 diviner groups located throughout the Central Plains. The sect leaders of these halls were renowned diviners in the hidden world. Although they might not have reached the pinnacle known as the Six Directions gods, they were said to be at least of intermediate level, so their skills must be extraordinary. Are there also ranks among Mi-Mang-Nyong entities? Like ghosts? At Mok Jong-un's question, Sak nodded. Yes. What level would a top-tier one be? Mi-Mang-Nyong can be classified into fierce beasts, monstrous beasts, demonic beasts, diabolic beasts, spiritual beasts, and divine beasts based on their rank. Sak's spirit servant, the armadillo, was referred to as a fierce beast in the classic of mountains and seas. In fact, among Mi-Mang-Nyong, fierce beasts were considered relatively docile and tended to avoid humans. However, even monstrous beasts included some that preyed on humans. Therefore, starting from monstrous beasts, subduing or controlling them as spirit servants was extremely challenging. Then that sect leader must control a spiritual beast or divine beast. At those words, Sak shook her head. No, that's not the case. It's not? Yes. Spiritual beasts and divine beasts are walking calamities themselves, so even the most exceptional diviners find it nearly impossible to make them their spirit servants. Spiritual beasts and divine beasts were beings referred to as calamities or legends. Even she had never actually seen these beings. She had only encountered records about them in ancient texts or the classic of mountains and seas, which she had studied to learn exorcism techniques. Considering that, the Six Directions gods must be truly remarkable. The Six Directions gods, known as the pinnacle of diviners. They were 6 diviners who had received the title of god. Among them, she had heard that 2 had subdued spiritual beasts as their spirit servants. Out of countless diviners, only 2 had reached that realm, so they deserved the title of god. Then it must be a demonic beast or diabolic beast, right? That's probably the case. Even if not above the level of spiritual beasts, being a demonic beast or diabolic beast was enough to be considered top-tier among Mi-Mang-Nyong. They were beings that gained notorious reputations in a region or possessed extraordinary powers. Mok Jong-un muttered softly, his lips twitching. It would be nice if it were a diabolic beast. Pardon? It's nothing. Sak furrowed her brow. What did this man just say? As she was wondering, Mok Jong-un handed the armadillo to her and said, "All right, you may go now." With trembling eyes, she received the gasping armadillo. After Sak left, the escort guard Go-chan spoke with a concerned tone. "Young master, is it okay to let her go like that?" "I promised to let her go, didn't I?" At Mok Jong-un's words, Go-chan grumbled inwardly, since when was he merciful? However, he didn't show it on his face. Perhaps he had grown accustomed to it. "Will it be all right? I have a lingering concern that the diviner woman might harbor resentment and seek revenge." "It's fine. Aren't you worried?" There was a possibility. Although he couldn't see anything with his eyes, based on what he had heard, it seemed Mok Jong-un had threatened the diviner woman with something precious to her. So there was a chance she might hold a grudge because of that. In response, Mok Jong-un said with a peculiar smile, "Go-chan's words are correct, but she probably won't be able to do that. Probably." At Mok Jong-un's words, Go-chan was puzzled. He didn't know what gave him such confidence. Tremble, tremble. The diviner Sak cradling the gasping armadillo, her heart ached terribly. She had spent years with this child, and the armadillo was her only friend and family. yet it was on the verge of death. Having lost most of its energy, it wouldn't be surprising if it died at any moment. If she didn't somehow replenish or restore its energy, she might lose the armadillo. Uke. Her heart ached, and moreover, she was furious. She was someone who had been recognized as a talented individual, receiving the title of diviner at a young age, yet she had to endure such humiliation. The diviner Sak turned her head and looked towards the medicine hall where Mok Jong-un was. Although I'm retreating like this now, before long, it seems you're vowing revenge, mortal. Gasp, startled, Sak tried to quickly distance herself from the voice that suddenly came from behind. However, someone embraced her head with 2 arms from behind. Syuk. Oh no, she was at a loss. The coldness she felt from behind sent chills down her spine. Even the armadillo she was holding trembled like a leaf, terrified, not because it was weak, but out of genuine fear. This sensation, she couldn't possibly manort this feeling. The being that had deflected her reverse killing technique and damaged her spirit eyes. Beads of cold sweat formed on Sak's forehead, and those drops of sweat trickled down her cheeks. Drip, drip. It can't be. Now that she was in direct contact with this being, she was certain. This was definitely not some green spirit or the like. How can this be? She couldn't believe it. To think he could control such an evil and spine-chilling being. Zap. Ugh. Her spirit eyes, reacting to the evil entity, shed tears of blood with excruciating pain as if they were being torn apart. She could no longer see anything with her spirit eyes. Swirl, swirl. Through her dark pupils, she saw someone looking down at her upside down. A beautiful face. In stark contrast, those blood-red eyes gleaming with madness. The moment she met them, she couldn't breathe. Translator's notes: Gojo, or Gyudiao 6000, lie east of Mount Yeaguang. One arrived at Mount Luwu, a barren mountain where not a blade of grass grew, though it was rich in valuable ores. It was the source of the Zhejiang River, which flowed east and emptied into the Pang River, where lived a strange, man-eating creature that resembled, but was not, an ordinary bird. A horned vulture, the Gyudiao had a richly feathered body, a serpentine tail, and a head with a hooked beak and a single horn from which several pointed ends bent backward. Like the 9-tailed fox, it feasted on human flesh and had the fetching cry of a whimpering infant. His cry drew victims into its trap to become its next meal. Chapter 33, Martial Talent 1. A middle-aged man with a fierce appearance. He was Sang Ung-beek, the outer manor master of Yon Mok Sword Manor, known as the Merciless Fist. In northern Anhui province, he was a master of martial arts and had been the most loyal subordinate of the 2nd generation since the time the manor was founded by the Mok clan. Unlike the inner hall master Jang Myung-in, who had entered the manor trusting the manor master, Sang Ung-beek was known for his strong convictions even among the retainers. As such, Lady Siak couldn't win him over. He was a central figure in Yon Mok Sword Manor and held significant influence among the retainers. Therefore, she had no choice but to be cautious around Sang Ung-beek. It's true, outer manor master, no matter what, why would I order harm to be done to that child? Is that so? Despite her explanation, outer manor master Sang Ung-beek showed a reaction of disbelief. This infuriated Lady Siak inwardly. Not only had things become complicated due to that wench of a diviner's actions, but now she was also being subjected to suspicion. Damn wench. She had no idea what had transpired. The diviner had received 1,000 silver coins and then betrayed her at the drop of a hat. Ghostly spirit pavilion sack, she would make sure they paid the price. Right now, this man was another problem. Phew. Outer manor master Sang Ung-beek had a persistent nature. Once he harbored suspicion, he would continue to monitor and scrutinize her. In this situation, she had no choice but to distance herself from Mok Jong-un for a while. Troublesome. She needed to seize the secret manual from that bastard Mok Jong-un. If Sang Ung-beek's surveillance caused the second son, that incompetent Mok Yun-pyong, to snatch it away, Yong-ho's position might be jeopardized. She needed a different approach. Outer manor master Sang Ung-beek was gazing at her with a suspicious look. He clicked his tongue inwardly. It's a mess. Ever since the Manor Master's life had become uncertain, with his death imminent any day, Yon Mok Sword Manor had literally fallen into disarray. Still, he thought they would at least mind their manners until the Manor Master drew his last breath. But this was the worst. Even with the Manor Master still alive, they were openly trying to kill other successors in a fight for the position of the next Manor Master. Manor Master? If the Manor Master learned of this, he would be greatly disappointed. On the other hand, it was regrettable. If the Manor Master had firmly established the succession from the beginning, he and the other retainers would have upheld his will and protected the designated successor. But that hadn't been the case, leading to this situation. Now, even the retainers' opinions were mostly divided, so the moment the Manor Master's breath ceased, Yon Mok Sword Manor might truly become a battlefield among blood relatives. What should I do? In the end, he too had to make a choice. Normally, it would be right to support the eldest son, Mok Yong-ho, but seeing this, it was utterly disappointing. Even considering the first wife, it was undesirable. The person who would become the eldest in the family once the Manor Master passed away was engaging in such acts. But suddenly, something didn't make sense. Come to think of it, the second young master too, why were they targeting the third young master, Mok Jeong-un? If they had fought among themselves or targeted the youngest young master, whom the Manor Master cherished the most for his innate martial talent, it would have been somewhat understandable. But the third young master, Mok Jeong-un, had absolutely nothing. He lacked martial talent, and with the downfall of his mother's maternal family, his position had weakened. None of the retainers supported him, so neither the chief wife nor the second young master had any reason to keep him in check. Yet they targeted his life. Because he's the easiest target? No, it was too early for that. The Manor Master hadn't even passed away yet, and engaging in such acts would only cause them to lose the support of the retainers. Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek grew genuinely curious. Why had they targeted Mok Jeong-un? There must be something they needed to keep in check, prompting them to prioritize targeting him above all else. I need to find out what it is. It wasn't a matter to be overlooked. If there was something that made them all willing to risk his life, it needed to be verified. Swish. Someone entered the medicine hall by passing through the ceiling. It was none other than Chun-gryong, wearing a crown and holding a long pipe in her mouth. Demonic Monk greeted her respectfully with a bow. In response, she grumbled, "Is it because she had a spirit servant? Or because she's a diviner?" She had been waiting for an opportunity to try to possess Sak's body. However, she had failed. She was confused about what the problem was. Diviners take precautions to protect their bodies with incantations or talisman techniques in advance. As a result, low-grade ghosts, even if they wanted to possess the bodies of diviners or individuals with strong energy, were unable to do so. But Chun-gryong wasn't a low-grade ghost, yet she couldn't possess the body. Tusk. She had tried to sever the forced bond through possession, but had failed. Was it because she, herself, had become a spirit servant? With a sullen expression, Chun-gryong descended and gazed at Mok Jeong-un, who was sitting on the bed, focused on the reverse circulation of Kai. There's no way to escape, but this fellow, her blood-red eyes flickered with intrigue. Through her ghostly eyes, she could see that Mok Jeong-un's energy was becoming considerably stable. Ho-ho. Mok Jeong-un had absorbed the energy of the ritual of binding armadillo through the Chakui technique. The energy of an ritual of binding is more negative and purer than the death energy generated from a deceased human. She had expected him to be unable to control it or even expel a significant amount, but it was unexpected. He was steadily absorbing this energy. Chun-gryong approached close to Mok Jeong-un. Then she brought her face close to Mok Jeong-un's, who was focused on circulating his Kai. Strange, the scar on his forehead. It hadn't been long since he was cut, but the wound looked as if several days had passed. At this rate, it seemed like it would heal within a few days. It surpasses human resilience. She had found it strange that he had survived despite suffering injuries that could be considered nearly fatal before becoming a spirit servant. But upon closer inspection, it was clear. This fellow possessed a recovery ability incomparable to ordinary humans. How is this possible for a human? There's something. He was definitely not an ordinary human. If she hadn't been forcibly turned into a spirit servant and lost control, she could have seized his body to find out why, which was a pity. Clicking her tongue, Chungryong stared intently at Mok Jeongun's face. Quite a pretty face. She had felt it before, but Mok Jeongun's face could be considered exceptionally beautiful. It met the criteria for a pretty boy. Although she didn't particularly like this mortal fellow, at least his beautiful face was somewhat tolerable. It was suitable for appreciation. Pak, at that moment, Mok Jeongun suddenly opened his eyes. As a result, their eyes met at close range. Oh my, this guy surprises even ghosts. What are you doing? Saying she was admiring his face would be embarrassing. In response to his question, Chungryong distanced herself and casually turned her head to the side, holding the long pipe in her mouth, feigning ignorance. What am I doing? I'm not doing anything. Mok Jeongun, who had been silently observing Chungryong, asked. Did you handle that matter well, HMPH? How dare you ask me such a question? As expected of Chungryong. Mok Jeongun smiled brightly. As if displeased by his attitude, she raised one eyebrow. She felt like she had made a mistake by agreeing to help this fellow. She had offered to assist him, going against expectations, to see how he would handle the ritual of binding Armadillo and the diviner woman on his own, but now she regretted it. To her, Mok Jeongun said, You were gone for a long time, so I wondered if you had left for good. Leave, you say. Chungryong grumbled grumpily at Mok Jeongun's perceptive words. Her desire to leave was immense. Apart from agreeing to help him, her true intention was to sever the bond of being a spirit servant at the first opportunity. Stop talking nonsense and continue circulating your Kai. If you want to make the energy you took from the armadillo your own, even a little bit you should. There's one thing I want to confirm. Confirm. Yes, I'm curious if this is what they call the Danjian. Danjian. It's still unknown whether you can form a Danjian with death energy or not. If you diligently, isn't this tiny clump below the navel the Danjian? What? Chungryong furrowed her brow. Did this fellow just say he had formed a Danjian? That can't be. Chungryong looked at Mok Jeongun with an expression of disbelief. No matter how much energy he had absorbed from the ritual of binding, forming a Danjian so quickly was incomprehensible to her. She had never seen such a precedent, even when she was alive. After sensing the energy, he had only circulated his Kai for a short while, and he had already created a Danjian. Can I check? Yes, I'm curious if it's correct, so go ahead. With that, Chungryong brought her palm towards Mok Jeongun's abdomen. The method of confirmation was very simple. As a ghost without a physical form, she could directly enter his body to check. However, it doesn't pass through. Her palm didn't enter his abdomen but stopped at the surface. As a high-grade ghost, she was capable of materializing her ethereal body for a brief moment. But this wasn't because she had materialized now. Tack, what are you doing? It won't go in. Why? How would I know? Even she couldn't understand the exact reason. It was clearly an ethereal state, so why was this happening? Thinking there might be a problem with herself, she approached Go Chan, who was snoring on the bed next to them. Then she inserted her hand into Go Chan's stomach. It went in so naturally. It works here. Then she briefly materialized the tip of her inserted hand and lightly touched his Danjian. The moment she did so, Go Chan woke up with a start. Eek! Then he trembled, his eyes rolled back, and he fainted. Chungryong had momentarily forgotten. The Danjian, from the moment it is formed, becomes the most sensitive part of the body. However, whether Go Chan fainted or not, she didn't care. Rather, tusk, what an exaggeration. Anyway, it's not my problem. She was focused solely on the conclusion. For some reason, her ethereal hand didn't pass through Mok Jeongun but collided with him. It was a highly peculiar occurrence. Strange. Could it be because he became a spirit servant? Hey, madman, you try it too. At her words, demonic monk approached and carefully touched Mok Jeongun's body. As expected, even demonic monk's ethereal body couldn't pass through Mok Jeongun's body. The two ghosts couldn't hide their puzzlement. Do you know why? If it's not between ethereal bodies, There's no reason for them to collide like this. Then it would be difficult for you to confirm whether I have a Dangian or not. Well, even if not, there are other. Before she could finish her sentence, squeak. The door to the medicine hall opened with a small sound. Wondering who it was, they looked in that direction and saw a middle-aged man with a fierce appearance entering. Outer Manor Master. It was Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek. Mok Jong-un remembered his face since he had interrogated him once before. Ah! Upon discovering Mok Jong-un sitting cross-legged, Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek's expression darkened slightly. It was because he saw the injuries covering his body. Although he was recovering quickly, the scabs still made it difficult to discern. Sang Ung-beek approached and spoke. "You're still awake, young master." "Ah, yes." Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek, who had come close, bowed his head deeply and said, "I apologize. If I had paid more attention, this wouldn't have happened." Based on appearances alone, Mok Jong-un's condition was at its worst. Sang Ung-beek, who believed he had ended up like this due to an attack, genuinely considered it his own negligence. That's why he was apologizing. In response, Mok Jong-un shook his head and said, "No, it's all right. These things can happen." "It's not a matter of these things can happen. The outer hall warriors were guarding, yet you were injured, young master. This is entirely my fault. You don't need to blame yourself." Mok Jong-un spoke with a smile. Sang Ung-beek's eyes flickered as he observed Mok Jong-un. As the Outer Manor Master, although not frequently, he had occasional contact with the young masters and had a rough understanding of their personalities. There were also rumors circulating within the manor. Strange, just like last time, Sang Ung-beek knew Mok Jong-un to be quite fussy and timid. Especially after his martial talent declined and his maternal family fell, he had become even more so. But looking at him now, should he say he was composed? He had faced life-threatening situations twice in a row, yet he remained so calm. This incident wasn't that long ago, yet there was no sign of fear or emotional trauma. Was he always like this? Suddenly, doubts arose. Even for adults, it was challenging to remain composed and calm despite being injured and having one's life threatened. "Young master, are you truly all right?" At that question, Mok Jong-un instantly realized that he had made a mistake. He had considered it trivial, but he should have feigned some distress. With that, he slightly lowered his head and said, "To be honest, I am worried that I might die quietly at this rate." Upon hearing those words, Sang Ung-beek's eyes narrowed further. His suspicions deepened. Even if he expressed concern only after being asked, it was already too late. This has become troublesome. Mok Jong-un also noticed his suspicion. Until now, he hadn't faced significant suspicion, but an unexpected person seemed to complicate matters. Although it didn't seem like he doubted whether Mok Jong-un was an imposter yet, continuously involving someone with such keen intuition would be unfavorable. At that moment, Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek spoke. "Young master, you don't look well." At that question, Mok Jong-un instantly realized that he had made a mistake. He had considered it trivial, but he should have feigned some distress. With that, he slightly lowered his head and said, "To be honest, I am worried that I might die quietly at this rate." Upon hearing those words, Sang Ung-beek's eyes narrowed further. His suspicions deepened. Even if he expressed concern only after being asked, it was already too late. This has become troublesome. Mok Jong-un also noticed his suspicion. Until now, he hadn't faced significant suspicion, but an unexpected person seemed to complicate matters. Although it didn't seem like he doubted whether Mok Jong-un was an imposter yet, continuously involving someone with such keen intuition would be unfavorable. At that moment, Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek spoke. "Young master, you don't look well. May I examine your body to see if you have any severe internal injuries?" Upon hearing that question, Chung Gryong, who was beside him, whispered, "It's better to be careful. If, as you said, a Dangian has truly formed, no matter how small it is, its energy will be completely unrelated to life energy." Mok Jong-un glanced at her with a puzzled look. Then she said with a smirk, "You might be mistaken for practicing an evil path." "What's that?" Mok Jong-un still didn't have much knowledge about martial arts. However, based on her tone, he roughly understood the meaning of her warning. With that, Mok Jong-un shook his head and said, "It's all right. When the physician comes tomorrow. Young master, please forgive my rudeness." Pack. Before he could finish his sentence, Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek swiftly grasped Mok Jong-un's right wrist using a golden rock hand technique. Sang Ung-beek's hand movements were much faster than those of the escort guard Gam or Lady Siak. There was no room to dodge. Not only did Sang Ung-beek grasp Mok Jong-un's wrist, but he also struck acupoints on his chest. Pack. He instantly struck the numbing acupoints that would immobilize the body. Having struck the acupoints, Sang Ung-beek injected his true energy through Mok Jong-un's wrist to examine his danjian. After injecting his true energy, Sang Ung-beek quickly examined Mok Jong-un's internal organs through the meridian pathways and tried to sweep down to the danjian. However, swish, the true energy that was flowing through his body suddenly dispersed. Sang Ung-beek furrowed his brow. Thinking that the true energy had been interrupted halfway, he tried sending it again, but the result was the same. Swish. His true energy flowed along the meridian pathways but dispersed once more. Something was strange. Sang Ung-beek pondered for a moment. Usually, when examining the body, one injects true energy to a degree that doesn't strain the other person's body. However, if it dispersed like this, he had no choice but to inject more true energy. It's just that this method could be a bit dangerous. Young master, I apologize, but I will inject a little more true energy. Although I have struck the numbing acupoints, please endure the discomfort for a moment. There's no other way, Chun-gryong. Chun-gryong, what is? Puck, it was at that very moment, Sang Ung-beek couldn't move for an instant. It was because he was seized by a bizarre sensation of something grasping his heart. Gasp, gasp. Instinctively, Sang Ung-beek knew. It was gripping very gently, but if it applied even a little force, it seemed like his heart would burst. What on earth was this bizarre occurrence? As he was perplexed, Mok Jong-un said something as if he were conversing with someone. No, it would be troublesome if you burst his heart. Please wait a moment. In an instant, Sang Ung-beek's eyes widened as if they would tear apart. Chapter 34, Martial Talent 2. How dare a lowly mortal presume to examine my body by striking my acupoints without permission? Does this fellow have a death wish? What should I do? If you don't want your heart to burst, should I just pluck it out? Gasp, gasp. Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek found it difficult to even breathe. He couldn't relax due to the hand grasping his heart. Mok Jong-un, observing Sang Ung-beek in this state, turned his gaze to Chun-gryong, who had a smirking expression behind him. Mok Jong-un was quite intrigued by her abilities. The difference in level is clear. Demonic Monk, who was at the yellow spirit level, seemed to struggle even against first-rate masters, but Chun-gryong had subdued Sang Ung-beek with incredible ease. He, who seemed stronger than the escort guard Gam, had been caught off guard without even sensing it. It seemed she could kill him at any moment if she wished to. It made sense why the basic writings of the school of Yin and Yang stated that beings above the green spirit level were difficult adversities to handle. It was worth the effort to patiently appease her. Although she wasn't fully under control like Demonic Monk, yet if he tamed her further, she might prove useful. Are you going to keep this up? I can't maintain this partial materialization for long. Ah, is that so? It was good to know. One must accurately understand an ability to use it appropriately in a given situation. Chun-gryong raised one eyebrow and said, "Perhaps you can't move because your acupoints have been struck." "No." Seuk. Mok Jong-un moved and removed Sang Ung-beek's hand that was grasping his wrist. At this, Sang Ung-beek's eyes, unable to move, trembled. He was certain he had properly struck the acupoints. Yet how could Mok Jong-un move? Could it be? Sang Ung-beek seemed to understand the reason. Even the forcefully injected true energy had dispersed within his body. That meant there was a high probability that the true energy used to strike the acupoints had also dispersed. A body resistant to acupoint striking without the acupoint reversal technique or profound internal energy. It was truly peculiar. To the astonished Sang Ung-beek, Mok Jong-un asked, "Does it hurt?" "Ha, ha! Are you in too much pain to even speak?" At Mok Jong-un's words, Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek carefully parted his lips. What on earth have you done to me?" Sang Ung-beek couldn't understand what this thing was that penetrated his body and grasped his heart. In response to Sang Ung-beek's question, Mok Jong-un chuckled and said, "You probably don't want to know." "Pardon?" If he learned what was behind him, he would become even more terrified. "And I don't feel the need to tell you." Upon hearing Mok Jong-un's words, Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek frowned, not knowing what to do. Was this really the Mok Jong-un he knew? The atmosphere was vastly different. To him, Mok Jong-un asked, "By the way, Outer Manor Master, why did you try to examine my body?" I'd appreciate it if you tell me properly." Gulp. Meeting Mok Jong-un's eyes, Sang Ung-beek unknowingly swallowed his dry saliva. He hadn't realized it, but those eyes were staring at him intently without blinking. What kind of gaze is this chilling? It wasn't the kind of gaze a mere 17-year-old boy should have. "You don't seem to want to answer. Chengryong, you said you wanted to burst his heart." I wanted to confirm." Sang Ung-beek hurriedly answered in response to the threat disguised as a non-threat. Mok Jong-un tilted his head slightly and asked, "Confirm what?" "I found it hard to understand why the first madam and the second young master would go to such lengths to target you." "You found it hard to understand why they were targeting me." "That's right." Why is that?" "Pardon?" "The competition for succession is in full swing, so it doesn't seem like a strange occurrence." At those words, Sang Ung-beek hesitated for a moment before carefully saying, "If this is your true self that you have been hiding, I can understand their sentiments. However, based on the image you have shown until now and your circumstances, the others shouldn't have actively targeted you from the start. The Manor Master hasn't even passed away yet, so it was strange for them to go to such lengths to target you. Thus, I thought you might be hiding something." Upon hearing Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek's words, Mok Jong-un clicked his tongue inwardly. To think suspicion could arise in this manner as well. The real fellow must have been quite lacking. It was ridiculous to be suspected for such a reason. Of course, it wasn't entirely incomprehensible. He had stood out too much in just a few days. Mok Jong-un stroked his chin. If Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek, whom he had only encountered once, harbored suspicion, other retainers might also keep an eye on him for similar reasons before long. Fortunately, it seemed there was no suspicion of him being an imposter yet. They just seemed to think he was hiding his strength. Mok Jong-un opened his mouth. "So, did you achieve your purpose of confirmation?" At that question, Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek parted his lips with a tense voice. "Did you hide it deliberately?" "Who knows? I have no obligation to tell you that. Rather, I'm contemplating what to do with you, Outer Manor Master. It's hard to maintain this. Just kill him, mortal." Chengryong spoke in a dry voice while puffing on her long pipe. Mok Jong-un shook his head slightly. "Not yet. If he killed the Outer Manor Master, the situation would truly escalate. Then his plan to learn martial arts at Yon Mok Sword Manor and leave would be disrupted. It was quite a dilemma. Then what are you going to do?" "Who knows? I'm reaching my limit soon. Decide." Outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek couldn't understand at all. Someone was clearly grasping his heart, but he couldn't sense any presence behind him. It was a situation that would make even ghosts wail. What was even more bizarre was that Mok Jong-un seemed to be conversing with someone, even though Sang Ung-beek couldn't hear anything. How was he supposed to accept this situation? But that didn't seem to be the problem now. It seemed he had learned something he shouldn't have known. He might even face execution. Thus, he hurriedly said, "Young master, please forgive my rudeness." "No, it's too late to ask for forgiveness for something that has already happened." "It is indeed rudeness. As a retainer of the Mok family, I should have approached more cautiously, but I was too hasty. I beg for your forgiveness." "It's all right. I truly had no other intentions. I simply wanted to confirm if you also possessed the qualifications for succession." This was true. He had been disappointed in the chief wife and the second son, Mok Yunpyong. That's why he wanted to verify if Mok Jong-un possessed something that warranted their caution. After all, the moment of decision would come when the Manor Master passed away in the future. Having witnessed your true self, Enough. Pardon? I have no interest in the succession struggle among the family members, but if even the outer Manor Master gets involved, it might become a bit tiresome. Why, young master, what did he mean? If he had no interest in the succession competition, why had he hidden his true colors? Sang Ungbeek couldn't hide his perplexity. Good, then I can kill him, right? Chengryong said with a curled lip as if she had been waiting for this moment. No. No, then what are you going to do? Mok Jong-un glanced at the demonic monk beside him and said, Can you do what you tried to do to me before? At those words, demonic monk's eyes flickered with interest. Chengryong gave him a questioning look, and Mok Jong-un pointed at outer Manor Master Sang Ung-beek with his finger and said, I remember reading in the basic writings of the school of yin and yang that when a ghost possesses someone, it's called possession. Can you do it? What? Chengryong's eyes widened at those words. Was this fellow blatantly giving an opportunity for possession? Instead of giving such a great opportunity to her first, he was giving it to this rebel monk, Chengryong's eyes narrowed. Come to think of it, she truly disliked the fierce appearance of this mortal named Sang Ung-beek. It wasn't a body she particularly wanted to seize. Thus, Chengryong spoke in a tone as if she was willingly yielding. Since he's giving you the opportunity, why don't you try it, rebel monk? Demonic monk glanced around furtively, then looked at Sang Ung-beek with eyes like he was eyeing a delectable prey. The desire to seize a living body, the Hun, soul, and Po, corporeal soul, was the instinct of all ghosts. Even if they became spirit servants, it was the same. You can hold him, right? It's not a difficult task. At those words, demonic monk approached Sang Ung-beek. Shiver. As he got close, almost face to face, Sang Ung-beek, sensing this chilling sensation with his intuition, cried out to Mok Jong-un in startlement. Why, young master, what are you trying to do now? You heard it, didn't you? Pardon? Possession. As soon as those words were spoken, demonic monk merged into Sang Ung-beek's body. Swish. Ugh. Feeling this, Sang Ung-beek hurriedly drew up the energy from his danjian, trying to expel this unpleasant something from his body. However, at the same time, Chengryong touched Sang Ung-beek's danjian and brain. Gah! Although temporarily, the energy that was about to spread from the danjian throughout his body was blocked. Moreover, as she touched his cerebrum, Sang Ung-beek's eyes became dazed, as if he had lost consciousness. Demonic monk seized this moment and attempted to possess Sang Ung-beek's body. Erg, Sang Ung-beek's waist bent like a bow. Then an eerie sound emerged from his mouth. K-cuke, 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 K-cuke. Tuck, tuck, tuck. Black veins bulged out here and there, and his appearance resembled the previous state of the Manor Master. It was the process of occupying the body through killing. Understanding this, Mok Jong-un looked at Sang Ung-beek with an intrigued gaze. His body was twisting violently, and he seemed to be in great agony. Who? Chengryong exhaled a thick cloud of smoke from her long pipe. She, too, was observing this with eyes full of anticipation, just like Mok Jong-un. Please, let it be severed. That wench named Sak had failed because she was a diviner. But this man named Sang Ung-beek was different. She hoped that the demonic monk would succeed in dominating the body and sever the bond of being a spirit servant. If that happened, she could also target a corporeal soul that seemed easy to deal with at any time and sever the bond of being a spirit servant herself. Swish. It was at that moment when they were watching with anticipation. The black veins that had been bulging out from the skin seemed to subside as the body became somewhat dominated, and the agonized expression on Sang Ung-beek's face disappeared. It changed to a completely expressionless state. Tuck, tuck, tuck. Straightening his waist, Sang Ung-beek opened his eyes that had been closed. With a pale face and a peculiar glint in his eyes, different from ordinary people, Sang Ung-beek's demeanor had changed significantly from before. At that moment, Sang Ung-beek slightly tilted his head and trembled. Why is this happening? Is the possession not finished yet? In response to that question, Chengryong answered, he must be imprisoning the self. It's natural to dominate the mind after seizing the body. Oh, is that so? Once the mind is dominated, everything is taken away, even the memories of the possessed body. Memories? Ah! Come to think of it, when demonic monk was an evil spirit, he had once used a diviner's incantation to make the manor master blurt out the location of the secret manual in his mind. If memories could be read, it meant one could almost be divided into that person. The corners of Mok Jong-un's mouth curled up slightly. Not bad. There was no need to go through the series of troublesome processes to make him useful. A spirit servant was completely his own. There was no worry about them changing their mind at any moment, unlike humans. It was at that very moment. The trembling of Sang Ung-beek's head stopped. Although a subtle ghostly energy could be seen in his eyes, the paleness had disappeared to the point where it was difficult to discern at a glance. "Is it over?" In response to that question, Sang Ung-beek nodded. Then, as if satisfied, he said with a twitching mouth, "My lord. This body is now mine." The possession was successful. Mok Jong-un also smiled in satisfaction at having completely seized the body. The outer manor master's body. It might make his range of action much more convenient in the future. On the other hand, Chengryong's expression wasn't very pleasant. The reason was that she could see the red thread protruding from Sang Ung-beek's chest, still connected to Mok Jong-un. Tusk. Severing the bond of being a spirit servant through possession was impossible. Chapter 35. Martial Talent 3. Early the next morning. One of the young servants in the medicine hall carefully brought Mok Jong-un's breakfast on a tray. "As you instructed, the meat is prepared with visible blood." Although he followed the order, the servant frowned, finding the blood unpleasant. Mok Jong-un smiled brightly and said, "Why, do you find the blood unappetizing?" "Ah, no, that's not it." The servant waved his hands in denial. As a mere servant, he was worried that offending the young master might lead to trouble. However, Mok Jong-un still spoke with a smiling face. "When the meat is fully cooked, the texture isn't great. Should I say it's tough? I prefer it when it's tender and has some blood. Try eating it like that sometime." Yes. He couldn't understand what was so delicious about it. There was a difference between slightly undercooked meat and meat with that much blood. Especially with pork, it seemed like it would be rather gamey. It was indeed a unique taste preference. As the servant withdrew, Mok Jong-un savored his meal with relish. His manner of eating was incredibly elegant. Munch, munch. He chewed precisely around 30 times before swallowing, repeating the process, and never opened his mouth while chewing. His use of chopsticks was also quite refined. Watching this with narrowed eyes, escort guard Go-chan was inwardly puzzled. Mok Jong-un had said he lived alone with his grandfather in the mountains, but judging by his behavior, it seemed like he had received proper etiquette training. Come to think of it, his way of speaking was similar. For someone known as a murderous demon, he habitually used honorifics towards others. The more I know, the less I understand. As he pondered, his stomach involuntarily made a sound. Growl. Seeing Mok Jong-un eat, he couldn't help but feel hungry. However, as if hearing that small sound, Mok Jong-un was now looking at him. "Huh, you must be hungry." Startled, Go-chan, who had been observing with narrowed eyes, quickly sat up and greeted him. "Why, young master, did you sleep well?" "No, I didn't sleep as much as you, guard Go-chan." "You didn't sleep?" "Yes." "Then, after your meal, you should get some more." "No, if I die, I can sleep as much as I want." No matter what he says, he always manages to give people the chills. Go-chan swallowed his dry saliva and said, "Is something troubling you?" "I suppose you could call it a concern. It's nothing major, and I was planning to ask you about it when you woke up anyway." "What do you mean?" Go-chan asked, feeling unnecessarily anxious. After experiencing those bizarre events last night, he hoped today would be a bit quieter. He even had a dream where a female ghost smoking a long pipe appeared and stuck her hand into his stomach. To that extent, he felt like he wasn't in his right mind these days. Mok Jong-un lowered his voice and said, "Do you know the basic techniques of Yon Mok sword manner?" "Pardon." At that question, Go-chan momentarily looked at Mok Jong-un with a puzzled expression. That's because he wondered why Mok Jong-un was suddenly asking about the basic techniques. Mok Jong-un asked again, "Do you know them?" "I've coincidentally witnessed them a few." "Oops." For a moment, he almost said the real Mok Jong-un without realizing it, but he quickly rephrased. I've seen you practicing them a few times before, young master. Even though he was lazy and lacked martial talent, the real Mok Jong-un was still from a martial arts family. Naturally, he had practiced martial arts before. Of course, his practice was almost negligible, but still. That's fortunate. Then, can you teach me the basic techniques? Pardon? I'm asking you to teach me the basic techniques. How can I? Go-chan asked back, unable to understand Mok Jong-un's request. At this, Mok Jong-un recalled yesterday's early morning. Having discovered the formation of his danjian, Mok Jong-un tried to practice the ignited wood sword formation he had memorized in the hidden training room of the medicinal hall. However, an unexpected problem arose. The movements aren't connecting. It's strange. He moved his body according to the memorized secret manual, but the movements didn't flow together at all. Why was that? Chengryong looked at Mok Jong-un and chuckled, saying it's an advanced martial art. Pardon? Mortal, you really know nothing about martial arts. What's an advanced martial art? To put it simply, it's literally a high-level martial art. It's difficult to reach an advanced realm through ordinary martial arts, no matter how much you practice, but advanced martial arts are different. They contain condensed insights to reach an even more profound realm. Then isn't that a good thing? You fool. What's good about it? What? Without basic techniques, it's impossible to understand the forms of advanced martial arts. To eliminate unnecessary postures and forms, one must have a foundation in basic techniques. Do you understand? Roughly? Tusk. Anyway, if you don't practice the basic techniques, you won't even be able to learn half of the first form of that sword technique. That's how it turned out. Therefore, Mok Jong-un asked Go-chan if he knew the basic techniques of Yon Mok sword manner. It seems I can't learn the ignited wood sword formation without the basic techniques. Mok Jong-un honestly told Go-chan. At those words, Go-chan asked with a surprised expression, You're trying to learn the Manor Master's exclusive secret technique? Yes, is there a problem with that? Rather than a problem, are you perhaps aiming for the successor position, young master? The reason for Go-chan's surprise was that he was well aware that Mok Jong-un wanted to learn martial arts. However, if that martial art was the ignited wood sword formation, which was exclusively for the Manor Master, the story would be a bit different. The term, Manor Master's exclusive, wasn't attached to that secret manual for no reason. No, how could that be? But why? If it's the Manor Master's exclusive martial art, wouldn't it be all the more useful? Is it appropriate to describe it as merely useful? Among the past Manor Masters of Yon Mok Sword Manor, there were some who had become the overlords of Anhui Province using the ignited wood sword formation. That's how renowned the ignited wood sword formation was as an advanced martial art, even in the Gangho. It's not just useful, but an extraordinary sword technique. But young master, if you learn that, it might cause problems later. It's fine as long as we don't get caught. Getting caught was not the issue. The moment he learned it, it would be no different from participating in the Manor Master Succession War. Aside from the current Manor Master, who was on the verge of death, no one had learned the secret manual. If Mok Jong-un alone learned it, there would surely be an uproar. However, Go-chan couldn't bring himself to say the rest. After all, Mok Jong-un wasn't the type to listen even if he told him not to. Sigh, but young master, I cannot teach you the basic techniques. Why? Even if I've seen the basic techniques a few times, I don't remember them accurately, and I don't know the Chi circulation formula for the basic techniques either. Ah, that's right. In the secret manual, there was something called a Chi circulation formula for each form. The utilization of internal energy differed for each posture within a form. If this was incorrect, the technique wouldn't display its proper power, and if done incorrectly, could even lead to internal injuries. With that, Mok Jong-un asked, then who knows the basic techniques? Naturally, it would be the young masters and the Manor Master who is bedridden. The basic techniques of Yon Mok Sword Manor, the ignited wood 9 forms, and the ignited wood beginner's sword technique. Although they were called basic techniques, they were martial arts that could only be learned by those with the blood of the Mach family. Only them? Yes, that's right. Mach Jong-un placed his chopsticks on the rice bowl and stroked his chin. He hadn't expected that only they would know the basic techniques. He thought there would be some among the martial artists within Yon Mach's sword manor who knew them, but it deviated from his expectations. Then, as of now, since the manor master was bedridden, the only ones who knew the basic techniques were the 3 young masters besides himself. It's impossible. Go-chan shook his head slightly. There was no way the other young masters would teach Mach Jong-un the basic techniques. In the first place, if he asked them to teach him because he didn't know, he would be subjected to unnecessary suspicion. There was no way around it. However, Go-chan suddenly grew curious. Wait a minute, but he hasn't even formed a danjian yet, so what is he trying to learn? As far as he knew, Mach Jong-un hadn't even created a danjian yet. Yet, whether it was the basic techniques or anything else, trying to learn the forms so soon was too hasty. At that moment, Mach Jong-un slowly got up from the bed. Young master? There's no other way. Pardon. Let's go. Where are you referring to? Since they are the only ones who can teach me, I'll have to learn from them somehow. But young master, the other young masters won't teach you the basic techniques, and if you ask them to teach you, you might be on their radar. I'll come up with an excuse or persuade them. Pardon? How? I'll figure that out myself, so let's go for now. As Mach Jong-un urged him, Go-chan cautiously tried to dissuade him. Young master, for now, since you're injured, wouldn't it be better to rest for a few days? The outer hall warriors are guarding this place anyway, so if you wander around with an injured body, you don't need to worry about the outer hall warriors. Pardon? What does he mean by not worrying about the outer hall warriors? It was another puzzling statement. On the way to the exclusive training ground for the young masters, escort guard Go-chan, still unable to understand, glanced towards the medicine hall and tilted his head. Oh my, something was strange. Just yesterday, the outer hall warriors seemed to be monitoring them. But suddenly, their attitudes had changed. As soon as they saw Mach Jong-un, they politely greeted him with a bow. When he said he was going to the training ground instead of stopping him, they wanted to follow him as an escort. We will accompany you, young master. No, it's all right. Of course, Mach Jong-un declined their offer. What the? He couldn't understand why they were acting this way. It was also puzzling that this suspicious little devil didn't find it strange at all. Did something else happen while he was asleep? It was utterly incomprehensible. But that wasn't the important matter now. Young master, are you really going? Yes, I said I'm going, didn't I? At Mach Jong-un's consistent answer, Go-chan was at a loss. That's because the person Mach Jong-un was seeking was none other than the youngest young master, Mach Yuchen. This is insane. His relationship with the other young masters wasn't good either. But Mach Yuchen was a bit more extreme. No, it wasn't for no reason that the real Mach Jong-un had avoided encountering him. Go-chan cautiously warned, young master, it could really lead to big trouble. Even now, it would be better to turn back. Big trouble. He must really hate me, huh? Didn't I mention it before? Ah, you said that the real Mach Jong-un who died almost got beaten to death for disparaging Mach Yuchen's mother as a vulgar prostitute wench, right? Then why are you going despite remembering that? Go-chan still remembered it. Stop it. I was wrong. Arg. He remembered how the real Mach Jong-un, with his leg and rib bones shattered, had crawled on the floor. He had desperately begged for his life. Given that incident, the youngest young master, Mach Yuchen, genuinely despised Mach Jong-un. Would he teach the basic techniques to the person he hated if asked? The other two are not in a position to make a deal right now. But if we're picky about everything, we won't be able to do anything. So let's go for now. Ah, he really won't listen. It seems like he lacks a sense of crisis, so he should clearly explain it to him. Young master, Mach Yuchen is a monster who has reached the early stage of the peak realm at the mere age of 16. A master at the peak realm is several times stronger than a first-rate master. If you carelessly provoke him, it could lead to serious consequences. Yes, I understand. Arg. Go-chan pounded his chest in frustration. There was no other way now. He thought Mok Jong-un would have to experience firsthand what kind of relationship the real Mok Jong-un and Mok Yuchen had. Before long, the first training ground came into view. There, Mok Yuchen could be seen shirtless practicing horse stance training like last time. He never neglected his training, not even for a day. Ho ho! Quite a decent mortal. Chen Gryong's voice reached Mok Jong-un's ears. Even under the sunlight, her level was clearly high, so unlike Ma Seung, she maintained her original appearance. Taking a deep puff from her long pipe and exhaling, she said, "He has martial talent." "You can see that." "You think there are many 16-year-olds with that level of life energy?" In Chen Gryong's ghostly eyes, the surging energy over Mok Yuchen's shoulders was clearly visible. He possessed outstanding martial talent that she would have wanted as a disciple if she were still alive. She warned Mok Jong-un. "He's the type commonly referred to as a genius. It's better to be careful. Even I find it difficult to exert my power under the sunlight." Sunlight was the embodiment of life energy. Therefore, it was challenging for her to maintain her form. Nodding slightly at Chen Gryong's warning, Mok Jong-un entered the training ground. Naturally, Mok Yuchen's gaze turned towards him as he was practicing horse stance. Upon discovering Mok Jong-un, Mok Yuchen's face hardened terrifyingly. Anyone could see that his expression was filled with anger. Damn it, as expected. Go Chan, thinking that Mok Yuchen might use force in a fit of rage, which could be dangerous, quietly tried to dissuade Mok Jong-un in a whisper. "Young master, I think it's better to go back. Young master." Despite his dissuasion, Mok Jong-un strode towards Mok Yuchen. Damn it, there was no other way now. At that moment, Mok Yuchen spoke while maintaining his horse stance. "Get out of the training ground." As expected, his words weren't pleasant. Go Chan wanted to recommend leaving the training ground while he had the chance. However, Mok Jong-un had no intention of doing so. Smiling brightly at Mok Yuchen, who was exuding a hostile atmosphere, he said, "Hello." Smiling at me. At Mok Jong-un's attitude, Mok Yuchen raised one eyebrow. Since that incident, the guy who had been avoiding him out of fear was now showing a smile in front of him. Did he have something to rely on? Mok Yuchen surveyed his surroundings. However, the only one protecting Mok Jong-un was the escort guard Go Chan, just a second-rate. He wasn't a formidable guard who could protect Mok Jong-un from him. Mok Yuchen scoffed inwardly. To him, Mok Jong-un said with a smiling face, "Do you also want to become the manner master?" "What?" Completely caught off guard by Mok Jong-un's words, Mok Yuchen frowned and turned his head. Then he spoke as if it was absurd. "What nonsense are you spouting?" "It's exactly as you heard. I asked if you also want to become the manner master." At those words, Mok Yuchen raised his voice and said, "I don't know what trick you're trying to pull by appearing in front of me, but stop talking nonsense and get lost, if you don't want to crawl out of here like last time. Well, I think you'll want to have this." Swish. With those words, Mok Jong-un took something out from his bosom. It was none other than a secret manual with the title Ignited Wood Heart Transformation Method written on it. Seeing this, Mok Yuchen's eyes widened. How did you get that? Do you want it?" Mok Jong-un temptingly waved the secret manual and asked Mok Yuchen. Chapter 36, Martial Talent 4. Mok Yuchen, the youngest young master of Yon Mok Sword Manor, he had no choice but to mature earlier than his peers. Upon learning that his mother was merely a Jising, Mok Yuchen realized the harsh reality at a young age. At first, he was in despair. No one acknowledged him as a young master of Yon Mok Sword Manor. He was just a bastard born with lowly blood. It was misfortune itself. After spending his childhood in despair, Mok Yuchen had only one breakthrough. Become stronger. The world was fair. His blood might be lowly, but his martial talent was exceptional. No, it was innate. The only way for him, who had nothing, to stand out was through martial arts. He believed that if he became strong enough that no one could look down on him, everyone would have to acknowledge him. "I will be recognized," and that actually came to fruition. The manor master, who had shown no interest in him as a bastard, gradually began to favor him due to his outstanding martial talent, and even the retainers acknowledged him. His half-siblings, who had scorned him, and his mother, could no longer treat him casually. Perhaps he, who had been ridiculed as lowly, might become the Manor Master. He had gradually swelled with hope. However, that expectation recently turned into anxiety. What will happen when the Manor Master passes away? The Manor Master hadn't designated anyone as his successor. If things continued like this, the prodigal eldest son or the cunning second son, Mok Yunpyong, could become the Manor Master. If that happened, the chief wife, who considered him a thorn in her side, might try to kill him. It became complicated again. He had hoped that his efforts could change everything, but it felt like hitting a wall once more. Yet, there was nothing he could do. He didn't have the capacity or financial means to scheme or build his power like his other half-siblings. Right now, there was only one thing he could do: to continue practicing martial arts. So even today, he was immersed in training to clear his mind of distracting thoughts. However, the face he least wanted to see in the manor, no, the face he despised the most, appeared. Mok Jong-un. Why did that bastard show up here? Putting aside his stupidity, he had no interest in practicing martial arts. Seeing him, his mind, which he had barely emptied while sweating, was about to become unpleasant. Get out of the training ground. Given that he had been beaten to death once before, if he had any sense, he should understand. However, an unexpected response came out of his mouth. Do you also want to become the Manor Master? What? For a moment it was absurd. What nonsense are you spouting? It's exactly as you heard. I asked if you also want to become the Manor Master. At those words, Mok Yuchen raised his voice and said, I don't know what trick you're trying to pull by appearing in front of me, but stop talking nonsense and get lost. If you don't want to crawl out of here like last time, well, I think you'll want to have this. With those words, Mok Jong-un took something out from his bosom. Seeing this, Mok Yuchen's eyes widened. How did you get that? Do you want it? Mok Jong-un waved the secret manual and asked Mok Yuchen. The ignited wood heart transformation method. It was a breathing technique and internal energy circulation method that only the Manor Master of Yon Mok Sword Manor could learn. As someone with the blood of the Mok family, there was no way Mok Yuchen wouldn't recognize this secret manual. How did that fellow? Mok Yuchen couldn't understand this situation. The Manor Master was bedridden and hadn't woken up yet, so how did that bastard Mok Jong-un have the secret manual of the ignited wood heart transformation method? But then, his mind suddenly became complicated. Could it be? Did Father give the secret manual of the ignited wood heart transformation method to this bastard? No way. That couldn't be. Regardless of their origin, the two sons' father considered the most pathetic were the eldest, Mok Yong-ho, and the third, Mok Jong-un. The reason was that both of them lacked martial talent and didn't put in effort. Didn't Father openly tell him? If only your brothers were half as good as you. Those words weren't said for no reason. Mok Yuchen glared sharply at Mok Jong-un and said, Where did you get that? Did you steal it behind Father's back? At those words, Mok Jong-un chuckled and said, That's not what's important, is it? Not important. There's no way Father would give the secret manual to someone like you. Who knows, if the Manor Master was attracted to me, he might have given it. Nonsense? Mok Yuchen raised his voice. HMPH. At that moment, Go Chan, who was standing behind, grimaced as his eardrums rang. He must really hate Mok Jong-un. He had even infused his internal energy into his voice, making it dizzying. On the other hand, Mok Jong-un showed no significant reaction other than slightly furrowing his brow. This caught Mok Yuchen's attention. No reaction at all. Normally, Mok Jong-un would have made a big fuss, but he endured it. Had he diligently practiced martial arts without anyone noticing? If that was the case, why did his energy feel even weaker than before? Puzzled, Mok Yuchen spoke again. Do you have any proof that it's genuine? Proof. Mok Jong-un chuckled and then casually held out the secret manual of the ignited wood heart transformation method. Mok Yuchen frowned at this. What trick was this? After a brief hesitation, Mok Yuchen took the secret manual. It wasn't out of greed, but because he was curious if it was the real secret manual. However, the secret manual was thin. Wondering what it was, he opened the secret manual and found only 2 pages inside the cover. The formula for the cultivation method could be short, but there was no way it would be just 2 pages. Was it really fake? So he read the formulas on the front pages, but the moment he read them, Mok Yuchen could be certain. It's real. He could discern it because he had perfectly mastered the basic techniques. Naturally, flipping to the next page to examine the remaining formulas, Mok Yuchen unknowingly swallowed his saliva in regret upon seeing the torn traces. He was seized by a momentary thirst. As a martial artist, he couldn't help but yearn for higher martial arts. The ignited wood heart transformation method and the ignited wood sword formation, which were exclusive to the Manor Master, were the secrets to advanced martial arts. If he learned them, he could reach the complete peak realm and even ascend to a higher realm of martial arts based on that foundation. Why are the contents missing from the back? At that question, Mok Jong-un smiled brightly and tapped his head with his finger. Understanding the meaning, Mok Yuchen's eyes narrowed. This fellow, has Mok Jong-un always been this cunning? Memorizing 90% of the original and showing this with only traces of it being genuine was a way to solidify that there was no way to obtain the secret manual without him. It seemed like he had even prepared for the possibility of the secret manual being snatched away. Is this fellow's thinking really correct? He glanced at the escort guard Go Chan behind him. However, judging by his nervous appearance, it didn't seem to be the case. Then it was true. He has changed. What has happened in the past 2 years? After that day's incident, he had never directly confronted or conversed with Mok Jong-un. It was because Mok Jong-un had been scared and constantly avoided him. However, the Mok Jong-un he saw after 2 years was very different from back then. Who are you? What do you mean? Putting aside how you obtained this, what trick are you trying to pull now? Does it seem like a trick? Pack. Mok Yuchen threw the secret manual on the ground, stood face to face with Mok Jong-un, and said, "Do you think it's normal for someone who has been running away and avoiding me and my brothers for 2 years to bring this and mention the Manor Master position?" I thought you'd want to become the Manor Master, but I guess not. What? If you don't want to become the Manor Master, then this proposal is rather meaningless. At Mok Jong-un's words, Mok Yuchen was dumbfounded. Proposal? What on earth is he talking about? While he was puzzled, Mok Jong-un picked up the secret manual from the ground, dusted it off, and said, "If you don't want to become the Manor Master, then you don't particularly need this either, right?" At those words, Mok Yuchen couldn't respond. Even if he didn't want to become the Manor Master, Mok Yuchen wanted to learn the advanced martial arts of Yon Mok Sword Manor. That was natural for a martial artist. However, the reason he was hesitating was that he couldn't discern Mok Jong-un's true intentions. This was clearly bait. What game are you playing? Game or not, if you're not interested, I'll just leave for now. With those words, Mok Jong-un put the secret manual into his bosom and tried to leave without any lingering attachment. Mok Yuchen stopped Mok Jong-un, who had only walked a few steps. "Stop." At those words, the corner of Mok Jong-un's mouth curled up. As expected, he took the bait. Although he had only conversed with this fellow just now, he roughly understood what kind of person he was. He was quite stubborn and moved according to his own beliefs. This type doesn't simply take the bait. You have to lay out the situation appropriately like this. Without turning his head, Mok Jong-un nonchalantly said, "I thought you weren't interested." "Not interested, but what game are you playing?" The same question over and over. "Shut up. Just answer my question. What's your intention in asking me if I want to become the Manor Master?" Intention? If you had one, you would have quietly learned it in secret and then aimed for the Manor Master position. But what's the point of bringing this to me and asking if I want to become the Manor Master? At that question, Mok Jong-un shrugged his shoulders. Then, slightly turning his body, he said, "Believe it or not, I have no particular interest in the Manor Master position." What? At those words, Mok Yuchen glared at Mok Jong-un with a suspicious gaze. No interest in the Manor Master position. Was he expecting him to believe this? Ha! Mok Yuchen let out a hollow laugh. Yeah, it was an absurd situation. The fact that he obtained that secret manual, came to him, and spouted such words was a trap in itself. Whatever his intention was, he must have schemed something sinister. In the first place, Due to the incident 2 years ago, he also disliked this bastard, but this bastard also greatly feared and disliked him. At that moment, Mok Jong-un approached him and said, "Unable to believe." Before he could finish his sentence, bam. Mok Yuchin's fist, which had suddenly extended forward, accurately struck Mok Jong-un's face. Upon receiving the blow, Mok Jong-un was pushed back and immediately fell flat on the ground. Drip, drip, blood flowed from his nose. He should have shown signs of pain, but the corners of Mok Jong-un's mouth trembled as he lay there. It's different. That was Mok Jong-un's state of mind. Putting aside the man with the black sword, he had directly experienced the skills of escort guard Go Chan, escort guard Gam, and others. Through that, he learned the difference between second-rate and first-rate. And now, directly experiencing the fist of the genius Mok Yuchin, who had reached the beginning of the peak realm at the mere age of 16, he realized the difference in strength. He understood why Go Chan had described him as several times stronger. This strength wasn't something that could be dealt with through luck. My body can't react. Although he saw it in an instant, his body couldn't keep up. It was a level that would be extremely difficult to confront unless one approached this level of strength to some extent. What is it? On the other hand, Mok Yuchin narrowed his eyes, keeping his fist extended. He had thrown his fist to shut him up. He knew that with his mere third-rate skill, Mok Jong-un naturally wouldn't be able to block it. But there was one thing different from the fellow he knew. He didn't close his eyes. He was looking straight at his fist. Usually, when faced with a fist that couldn't be blocked, one should flinch and close their eyes out of fear. But he continued to stare at the fist even at the moment of being hit. He wasn't afraid. That Mok Jong-un. While he was puzzled, Mok Jong-un sat up. Then, wiping the flowing blood from his nose with the back of his hand, he said, "Your fist is fierce." Fierce? A scoff escaped his lips. Strictly speaking, it wasn't a proper punch. He was certain that Mok Jong-un was trying to deceive him, so it was a single punch meant to teach him a lesson. It would be better not to get up. If you get up again, the intensity will increase to the point where you'll find what just happened laughable. Mok Yuchin warned him. And he actually intended to carry it out. However, Mok Jong-un chuckled and said, "It's natural to be suspicious." "It's not suspicion, but certainty. I don't believe anything you say." "Really? So I'll make you regret coming to me with such a trick." Mok Yuchin clenched his fist. Since it had come to this, he had to make it clear, like 2 years ago, no, even more so than back then. Only then would Mok Jong-un be unable to engage in such antics. With that determination, Mok Jong-un smiled and said, "Then I have no choice but to give it to the first madam or Mok Yunpyong." "What? Whether you believe me or not is your choice, but if you decide that way, I'll have no choice but to give the secret manual to the two sides to get what I want." At those words, Mok Yuchin flinched, because he understood the meaning of these words. Mok Jong-un continued, "When the Manor Master passes away, the retainers will eventually support the bloodline of the Mok family who has learned the secret manual as the Manor Master. What will happen if the Manor Master is chosen between Mok Yong-ho and Mok Yunpyong? Do you think they will leave you alone?" Mok Yuchin was at a loss for words at the remark that hit the nail on the head. He had been frustrated, unable to fathom what would happen in the future. That's why Mok Jong-un's words couldn't help but stick in his mind. Seizing that opportunity, Mok Jong-un stood up and continued, "I'm not sure, but you received the Manor Master's favor and were an outstanding successor who stood out more than himself or his own children. I don't think they'll just leave you alone." At Mok Jong-un's words, escort guard Go Chan couldn't hide his inner perplexity. Why is he provoking him further? This wasn't persuasion, but almost close to a threat. Provoking him like that was no different from asking to be killed, so what was he thinking? As expected, Mok Yuchin's face turned red with anger. "Are you threatening me now? You're not entirely clueless, are you?" "What?" It seemed like it would end with Mok Jong-un getting beaten up. With anger rising, Mok Yuchin tried to use force once again. At that moment, Mok Jong-un spoke in a chilling voice. "It's a matter of life and death. I guess you don't hear the threat as a threat. Flinch." At those words, Mok Yuchin stopped his hand. He was very angry, but he couldn't possibly ignore Mok Jong-un's words. since the manor master hadn't clearly designated a successor in the current situation. As Mok Jong-un said, the probability of the one who learned the secret manual becoming the manor master was extremely high. And if it fell into someone else's hands other than his own, clench, the result he had feared would unfold. To him, Mok Jong-un approached with light footsteps, gently placed a hand on his shoulder, and whispered in a small voice, "I think you understand the situation now." "Who holds the handle of the knife?" Mok Yuchin's eyes trembled. This bastard, was he really the Mok Jong-un he knew? Chapter 37, Martial Talent 5. Was this fellow really the Mok Jong-un he knew? Glaring at Mok Jong-un with anger-filled eyes, Mok Yuchin opened his mouth in an equally low voice. "Yes, you're right. If the secret manual goes to other brothers, my situation would be obvious without even looking. Since you understand your situation well now. But you know what? Have you ever thought that I could beat you to death and make the secret formula come out of your mouth?" Clench. With those words, Mok Yuchin grasped Mok Jong-un's wrist that was placed on his shoulder. Then he drew upon his internal energy and applied force. Thanks to that, the veins on the back of Mok Jong-un's hand swelled up as if they would burst at any moment. Mok Yuchin spoke, exuding a murderous aura. "With a little more force, I can cripple your wrist." Crunch. Mok Yuchin applied even more force to his hand. A twisting sound could be heard from the grasped hand, and if he squeezed a little more, it would be truly dangerous. "If you know that I can also go berserk when pushed." Mok Yuchin furrowed his brow. He thought Mok Jong-un would be in pain and agony to this extent. However, there was no change in Mok Jong-un's expression. Rather, he was staring intently at him. This bastard, he's enduring this? The situation is just a step away from his wrist bone breaking, yet he wasn't even anxious. For a moment, Mok Yuchin was dumbfounded. This didn't seem to be a matter of patience. "What are you? Are you really Mok Jong-un?" Gasp. At those words from Mok Yuchin's mouth, the expression of escort guard Go Chan, who was watching restlessly from behind, hardened. It was already worrisome that they had been in contact for too long. Could it be that their identities had been exposed? If that was the case, it could truly be the worst situation. But at that moment, Mok Jong-un chuckled and looked straight at Mok Yuchin, opening his mouth. "Then what do you think?" Seeing his unwavering demeanor, Mok Yuchin's eyes narrowed. The difference from the cowardly and timid fellow he knew was so great that it even felt strange. To him, Mok Jong-un said, "You talk as if you know me well, but what do you know to say that? Are you saying that I don't know you?" "Yes. What do you know, aside from being half-siblings and us having an incident 2 years ago? What do you know to ask like that?" At the question asked in a confident voice, Mok Yuchin closed his mouth. He was too confident, so he had nothing to say in return. His appearance had changed so much in 2 years that it was puzzling, but when asked in reverse like this, he didn't know how to answer. He hadn't had many conversations with him even before their confrontation 2 years ago. They were half-siblings, and everyone despised and kept their distance from him, calling him the offspring of a lowly Jising. This fellow was the same. Annoying. But why was this fellow being so arrogant in reverse? The question of what he knew about him was what he wanted to ask the people of this Mok family. Clench. Mok Yuchin, who had been biting his lip tightly, finally loosened the force in his grasping hand. Then, releasing Mok Jong-un's wrist, he said, "Let me ask you one thing. Why me?" "Why you? Yes, none of you bastards ever acknowledged me, then you could have made a deal with those proud bloodlines." At those words, Mok Jong-un nonchalantly said, "I just thought you were better than your brothers, that's all." For a moment, Mok Yuchin fell silent. Mok Yuchin stared intently into Mok Jong-un's eyes. He thought Mok Jong-un would also despise him because of the incident 2 years ago, just like himself. But hearing these words was truly unexpected. Of course, it wasn't a matter of their relationship suddenly improving because of this. Did I view this bastard too simply? That thought crossed his mind. He had wanted someone to recognize him, but he had never tried to understand someone else. Perhaps Mok Jong-un had truly changed over the past 2 years. Mok Yuchin lowered his guard and spoke while standing straight. "Phew, all right. Let's do whatever this deal is." "Good. What do you want?" Although he didn't show it outwardly, Mok Yuchen was inwardly worried about what request Mok Jeong-un would make. Offering a secret manual known as the Manor Master's exclusive martial art was no different from making a huge concession. Considering its value, there was no way he would ask for something trivial. He hoped it wouldn't exceed the level he could accommodate. To Mok Yuchen, Mok Jeong-un raised 3 fingers and said, "I have 3 demands." "What?" "I think it's worth this much." At Mok Jeong-un's words, Mok Yuchen didn't respond, because it was difficult to say it wasn't, so he thought he should at least hear what he would demand. "Still, that's a lot. Anyway, what are they?" "They're not that difficult for you." "I understand. Tell me." "First, if you become the Manor Master, don't touch me, even if I don't know about the other brothers." At those words, Mok Yuchen's eyes flickered with interest. Indeed, it wasn't an extremely difficult request. No, from Mok Jeong-un's perspective, it might be a natural demand. If he were to become the Manor Master with the support of the retainers, he would naturally engage in a war with the other half-siblings. "Even if I don't like this fellow, it's not a bad request from my perspective, because he could reduce the number of enemies by at least 1. With that, he readily answered, "All right, I can accommodate that much. What's next?" "If you become the Manor Master, I want continuous financial support." "Financial?" "Yes. Fine." This wasn't a particularly difficult request either. Hearing it, it sounded more like he was asking to be continuously responsible as a member of Yon Mok Sword Manor, rather than demanding a large sum of money. Mok Yuchen considered it not bad and accepted it. Unexpectedly, there weren't any significant demands as he had worried, so he considered it fortunate. However, he couldn't let his guard down. The final request could be substantial. "What's the last one?" "This isn't a big deal either. I want the cultivation method and martial arts formulas related to Yon Mok Sword Manor's basic techniques." "What?" Mok Yuchen furrowed his brow at the unexpected request. Seeing his reaction, Go-chan became inwardly anxious. Somehow they had luckily passed the issue of their identities, but if he asked about this, it would inevitably raise suspicion again. Will it work? As he was feeling anxious, Mok Jeong-un nonchalantly said, "You heard me. I want the cultivation method and martial arts formulas related to Yon Mok Sword Manor's basic techniques." At these words, Mok Yuchen spoke in a tone of incomprehension. "You know it too, don't you?" "I know it." "Then why are you demanding that? It's not necessary." "To be honest, the third request isn't really needed." Go-chan, puzzled, looked at the back of Mok Jeong-un's head. "What's this about? Not needed?" Like Go-chan, Mok Yuchen also asked in confusion. "Not needed?" "Yes, the first 2 are what I really want. But the last third one, I'm just demanding it because I personally have something to confirm." At those words, Mok Yuchen relaxed his furrowed brow. Then, tilting his head, he said, "What are you trying to confirm?" "It's nothing much. I just want to confirm if what I know is correct." "Confirm if what you know is correct?" "Yes, there's no other reason." At Mok Jeong-un's words, Mok Yuchen let out a faint smile. Seeing his reaction, Go-chan was puzzled. He couldn't understand why Mok Yuchen was showing such a reaction instead of being suspicious of Mok Jeong-un's ambiguous words. But the next words from Mok Yuchen revealed the reason. "Are you suspecting Father? Do you think Father taught me differently?" "What?" At those words, Go-chan's eyes widened. No, this was a completely unexpected approach. He didn't expect Mok Yuchen to make his own assumptions instead of being suspicious. In response, Mok Jeong-un nonchalantly said, "I just want to confirm. There won't be much difference. I'll know that when I hear what you say." At those words, Mok Yuchen scoffed. Then, shaking his head, he said, "There's no point in confirming, but you're doing something unnecessary. If there's no difference, you can just tell me. I can immediately confirm if it's different or not just by hearing what you say. You're making an absurd request. You have nothing to lose anyway." "Well, that's true. Then you can just tell me the formulas of the basic techniques right here. I'll also let you know right after you tell me." "What? Here?" Mok Yuchen glanced around and frowned, asking in response. Mok Jeong-un shrugged and said, "Why? Are you worried someone might eavesdrop, or do you perhaps lack confidence in memorizing it verbally?" At these words, Mok Yuchen spoke in an irritated tone. You're just in the position of confirming what you already know, but I have to memorize the formulas of an advanced martial art that I just learned. It's different. Ah, is that so? Then would it be better to write it down and send it to you? At these words, Mok Yuchen momentarily flinched. It would be more convenient to have it written down and sent, but upon thinking about it, that didn't seem right. I should hear it here, just in case. Although he had confirmed the secret manual, there was a slight chance that Mok Jong-un might teach him the wrong formulas. In that case, it would be better to hear it verbally here. That way, if there were any mistakes when he asked him to repeat it several times, he could discern them. Considering it a good idea, Mok Yuchen said, "No, let's do it here, but keep reciting it until I fully memorize the formulas." That's not difficult at all. Thus, the deal between the two was sealed. 2 hours and 2/4 had passed, on the way back to the medicinal hall. Escort guard Go Chan clicked his tongue as he looked at Mok Jong-un's back, walking with light footsteps. He's truly amazing. He had no choice but to acknowledge it this time. He knew Mok Jong-un was smart from his continuous experiences, but he didn't expect it to be to this extent. Originally, Mok Jong-un's only desired request was the basic techniques. However, he first mentioned plausible demands to dispel Mok Yuchen's suspicion. Moreover, he also requested the basic techniques, saying he just wanted to confirm if they matched what he already knew, naturally guiding the atmosphere. Ah, really, he was incredibly cunning. Of course, luck played a part to some extent. Thanks to Mok Yuchen's own assumptions, Mok Jong-un was able to take advantage of the situation well. That's because his intuition was extraordinarily sharp. It would be hard to be more natural than this. He was an amazing fellow, but there was one thing he was curious about. It seemed like Mok Jong-un had managed to hear the formulas of the basic techniques from Mok Yuchen, but due to the purpose of confirmation, it seemed like he only heard them once. Was it possible to memorize so many formulas after hearing them just once? After pondering whether to ask or not, Go Chan finally inquired, "Young master, but it seems like you only heard the formulas once. Is that all right?" "What do you mean? There are too many formulas to memorize at once. What's difficult about that?" "Pardon. Isn't it possible to memorize that much after hearing it just once?" At those words, Go Chan's eyes widened. He memorized those many formulas of the basic techniques, which took nearly half an hour after hearing them just once. The basic techniques included fist techniques, sword techniques, basic Kai circulation methods, and even body tempering methods. It was an amount that couldn't possibly be memorized after hearing it just once. Even Mok Yuchen, who was called a heavenly martial talent, had to hear it recited by Mok Jong almost 8 or 9 times before he could barely memorize it, didn't he? Did you really memorize it after hearing it once? Yes. It's not particularly difficult, so what's strange about it? Not particularly difficult? Then did that mean he and that young master Mok Yuchen were idiots? He had considered it amazing that Mok Yuchen was able to memorize it in about 2 hours just by listening to the recitation. Ha! If these words were true, this fellow's mind could truly be extraordinary. Go Chan, who was inwardly dumbfounded, shook his head. This fellow couldn't be judged by common sense, so it would be better for him to just go along with it. "No, it's nothing. I asked because I wasn't confident in memorizing it after hearing it once. Anyway, it's fortunate that the deal was completed without any issues. But will it be all right?" "What do you mean?" "Even if it was a deal, is it all right to teach the secret manual to young Master Mok Yuchen so readily?" Given Mok Yuchen's temperament, he was better than the other young masters. He would probably keep the agreed-upon deal unless something significant happened. But there was a sense of regret. Didn't he essentially give up the opportunity to gain the support of the retainers? To him, Mok Jong-un nonchalantly said, "It's not even the proper formulas, so there's no problem in teaching them." "Pardon?" Go Chan furrowed his brow. What was he talking about now? "Young master, what do you mean by that?" "Ah, I should have kept it to myself." "Pardon." Mok Jong-un put his arm around Go Chan's shoulder and whispered in his ear with a grin. "It's a secret, so only you know, Go Chan. I taught him the formulas of the ignited wood heart transformation method, and the ignited would sword formation by reversing the characters or changing them to have different meanings every 13 or 14 characters. I was nervous that I might get caught, but somehow it worked out well. Upon hearing those words, Go-chan couldn't hide his bewilderment for a moment. He had found it strange that Mok Jong-un handed over the secret manual too readily. But he taught the formulas of the cultivation method and sword technique incorrectly by arbitrarily rearranging them. If one practiced them incorrectly, they could suffer from Kai deviation, become a cripple, or even die. "Young master, if you do that?" "Why?" Mok Jong-un asked with his characteristically chilling smile. At this, Go-chan felt shivers all over his body. This fiend had no interest whatsoever in whether the youngest young master, Mok Yuchen, would be harmed or not. This fellow is truly a devil. The atmosphere earlier had been somewhat warm. He thought it was a deal that both sides could be satisfied with, but it wasn't at all. The winner of the deal was this devilish fellow. Phew. However, there was another being observing their appearance from the air, clicking its tongue. It was Chen-Griong. Chen-Griong looked at Mok Jong-un while puffing on her pipe. Crazy mortal. It was truly absurd. That mortal named Go-chan was completely unaware of this fact. Mok Jong-un had improvised and temporarily changed around 80 characters in the formulas, and he had recited them to Mok Yuchen 9 times without a single mistake, exactly the same each time. It goes beyond the level of having an extraordinary mind. Chapter 38, Dangerous Visit, 1. 4 days later, in a dense forest not far from the estate of Yon Mok Sword Manor, a man wearing a bamboo hat and carrying a backpack filled with old books and tools, dressed in a navy blue Taoist robe with the yin-yang symbol, was walking somewhere. Holding a sword technique hand seal in one hand and a talisman with the character Chinese letter Chase written on it in the other, the man continuously chanted an incantation. The heaven and earth are fixed, the sun and moon are fixed, the Kai of heaven and earth is bright, the Kai of the sun and moon is bright, the Kai of gods and ghosts is formed. The mind and the subconscious mind are united, the subconscious mind and the conscious mind are united. The mind of heaven and all minds. This was the harmony mantra. It was a type of summoning harmony technique used to meet someone whose whereabouts were unknown, and he had been searching the surroundings while employing this technique for 2 or 3 days straight. Normally, he would quickly find someone with this technique. However, it's concealed. A very strong and ominous energy was obscuring it. This wasn't a case of going missing or being killed in an ordinary manner. The power of evil spirits or techniques was involved. Who could it be? Sak was considered the third-ranking diviner within Ghostly Spirit Pavilion. Moreover, as she controlled the Mayhem entity Gaio as her spirit servant, she had the ability to single-handedly exorcise ghosts up to the yellow spirit level. Yet for her to be defeated like this was incomprehensible. What? How could that be? This is a letter sent by the chief wife of Yon Mok Sword Manor. Read it. The letter contained a threat-like protest. It stated that if they didn't hand over the penalty of 3,000 silver coins and sack, they would annihilate Ghostly Spirit Pavilion. If the contents of the letter were true, it was understandable for the chief wife to be angry, but it was unlikely for Sak to engage in such an act. There must be something more to it. Find her and uncover the truth. So he had been doing this day and night without rest. He had to find her quickly before Yon Mok Sword Manor made a move. At that moment, while he was focusing on the technique again, tremble, the talisman of Chinese letter Chase, held in his left hand, shook violently. Nearby. With that, the man grasped the talisman with both hands and chanted an incantation. The body and mind are virtuous. The ghosts and demons fill the sky, the left protects and the right necessitates. The clouds gather and disperse. The water flows and the valley is deep. The golden lock and the 4 seals urgently execute the imperial edict. As soon as the incantation ended, the shaking characters on the talisman darkened and floated in the air on their own, flying somewhere. Flap, flap. The man followed the flying talisman. Eventually, the talisman bent downward somewhere. It was hidden by thick bushes, and when he passed through, a quite steep cliff appeared. It was a place where one could easily fall to their death if they misstepped. The man looked around and found a slope to descend. There he discovered the talisman lying neatly on the ground. However, something else caught his eye before the talisman. In the surroundings, there were fragments of flesh and dried bloodstains, making it difficult to recognize the human form. Upon seeing this, the man couldn't help but frown. How could this happen? He had never anticipated such an outcome. He had considered the possibility of her being attacked, but this was more serious than he thought. The man swallowed his dry saliva. This was definitely not something that could happen with a mere yellow spirit-level entity. What on earth happened? Nothing could be determined solely based on this horrific scene. If at least the corpse had been intact, there would have been a way to find out in detail through necromancy, but with this, the chances were slim. However, there was no other choice. The man placed his hand on the ground in the center of the catastrophe and closed his eyes. Then, chak, chak, he formed hand seals with his left hand. Gi Chinese letter, Tu Chinese letter, Jian Chinese letter, Obak hand seal Osa followed by the Babiyang. They were the hand seals of the 9-character Dharani. 3 Yin Bright method. The Northern Emperor has granted me authority, so reveal all that has transpired. Urgently execute the imperial edict. Tremble, tremble. The blood-stained objects on the ground began to tremble slightly. Beads of cold sweat formed on the man's forehead. When one is killed by an evil spirit, even the soul and the remaining bodily energy are damaged, making it difficult to draw out the traces through incantations. Reveal everything. Urgently execute. The man's head was thrown back. Then, like a flashback, fleeting memories pierced his mind. Swish, myosin, cough cough, I deflected the killing technique you sent. Are you a diviner? Phew, it's quiet now. How can you grasp an Mimang Niang with your bare hands? You said you'd do anything, right? Now I'm retreating like this, but before long, shiver. At that moment, along with an ominous and spine-chilling energy, the man's consciousness returned. The man muttered with trembling eyes. What was that? The memory was cut off along with the tremendous fear Sack had felt at the end. It seemed like something had snipped off that part. If it were this level of fear and dread, there should have been at least a little bit of the final fragment visible, but there was none. Strange, all beings fall into fear in the face of death. However, the fear seen before this abruptly cut-off memory wasn't the fear felt before dying, but the emotion experienced while facing some immense terror. What on earth happened? He grew even more curious. The memories were too short, like fleeting moments, so it was impossible to know exactly what had transpired. Through the glimpses of some memories, he had only learned one thing. Mok Jeong-un, that person was at the center of Sack's death and this incident. Although it was just a fragment, there was one particularly memorable memory. Grasping an Mimang Niang with bare hands, it was a difficult feat even for diviners unless they met special conditions. From this, one of two things could be inferred. Either this young master named Mok Jeong-un was possessed by a yellow spirit, as they had initially suspected, making this possible. Or he might have been born with spiritual talent. If it was the latter, it was a remarkable talent. He might be a natural-born diviner. Such talent was hard to find. It was said that even the slightest ability to sense spiritual traces through one of the 5 senses indicated talent. However, touching an Mimang Niang, a mass of demonic energy, without any conditions, was on a completely different level. The man shook his head. This isn't what's important. For now, he had to make contact with this fellow named Mok Jeong-un to find out what had happened. The man glanced at the air and muttered, "Go, Joe. I have a feeling we shouldn't let our guard down." With those words, he gestured for someone to follow. Then, the shadow of an eagle on the ground flapped its wings in response. The strange thing was that the head of the eagle in this shadow had a peculiar set of horns. Shining Orchid Pavilion, located at the southern end of the back alley in the low-end market. It was overflowing with various low-quality prostitutes. Ha 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 ha. Drink up, I'll pay for everything today. Let's get wasted today. Due to these individuals, other customers couldn't even muster the courage to enter. Few. Watching them, escort guard Go Chan, who was standing at the entrance, sighed. At least this is the only information organization in this area. It was a place of quite low quality. If categorized into high, middle, and low, it would barely qualify as low grade. Just looking at the gathered individuals, the level was significantly inferior. However, he had an order from Mok Jong-un, so he came to make a request at a nearby place. Ask if they know this symbol. Pardon? How do I? You don't need to know the details. Escort guard Go Chan. Just submit the request to that information organization or whatever it is. Understood. What could this be? The symbol Mok Jong-un had shown him was quite simple. However, he had never seen it before. It might be because he had retired a long time ago, but if even he, a former assassin, didn't know it, it could be something trivial. Where is he anyway? The leader of this place should be here. Since it was a low-quality place, there were no special rules and they would bring information in exchange for money. Ah, there he is. He had met him a few times after settling here. Go Chan sighed once and called out to someone. Boss Guac. At his call, a man sitting in the middle of the inn, filled with the scent of alcohol, slowly turned his head without getting up. Then, blinking his eyes, he seemed to recognize Go Chan and stood up with a bright expression. Oh my! Isn't it escort guard Go Chan from Yon Mok Sword Manor? Although it had been a long time since they met, he was still a person immersed in alcohol and women. Even now, he had a woman who looked like a courtesan by his side, which was a distasteful sight. Go Chan shook his head and said, I have a request to make. A request? I will pay the proper price. I understand. Come up to the second-floor office. Although he didn't like it, he had heard that Boss Guac was originally from the House sect. That's why his information network wasn't too shabby. Not long after entering the private room, a thumping sound was heard from the second-floor corridor. He always made such noise due to his large build. He's disqualified as an assassin. The basics of an assassin lie in secrecy and confidentiality. Of course, individuals with such qualities were rare. At that moment, the door to the private room opened and Boss Guac entered. What are you doing? Go Chan asked, raising an eyebrow. Boss Guac had entered with a woman under his arm. Judging by her upswept hair, heavy makeup, and clothes that showed her cleavage, she seemed to be a courtesan. Her face was so beautiful that it drew the eye, but this wasn't the occasion for that. This is a new girl who recently joined. Isn't she nice? Didn't I say I had a request to make? She's one of our girls, so you don't need to mind her presence. If you have something to say, go ahead. I need to go down soon. This pathetic fellow. Go Chan inwardly felt murderous intent rising within him. No matter how low the quality was, this was truly below standard. If things continued like this, there was no need to make a request. Send her out. Oh, escort guard Go. As men, we should enjoy. If she keeps coming out like this, I'll just leave. Those words had an effect. Boss Guac, who had become like a mute who had eaten honey, irritably said to the courtesan, Go down and wait for this gentleman obediently. If I find you in the arms of another man, be prepared for the consequences. Then, as he tried to slap her buttocks with his palm tack, the courtesan caught Boss Guac's hand. Oh! Phew, how unpleasant, the courtesan muttered as if annoyed. You wench! At her attitude, Boss Guac was dumbfounded and tried to slap her face. At that very moment, Puck, the courtesan's hand had already reached Boss Guac's ear. Then Boss Guac staggered like a puppet whose strings had been cut. You! Startled by this sight, Go Chan hurriedly tried to draw his dagger, but something that flew from the courtesan's hand pierced his acupoint. Poo, Puck. It was a very thin needle. As the needle pierced him, Go Chan couldn't open his mouth or move. It was as if his acupoints had been struck. Ru. The courtesan pulled out a chair from the table and pushed it behind the staggering Boss Guac. Then, Boss Guac naturally sat on the chair. Of course, from the front, it didn't look like he was in good condition, with his eyes rolled back, showing only the whites of his eyes. This is... Go Chan couldn't hide his bewilderment as he looked at the needle stuck in his chest. As a former member of the Flying Kill sect, he couldn't possibly not know what this was. Lustrous Jade Flying Needles 1. It was the unique secret skill of flying killing Yama's Guest 2 technique. the sect leader of the Flying Kill sect, and one of the 4 great assassins in the Central Plains. It was impossible for a mere courtesan to use the lustrous jade flying needles, which could be considered the symbol of the sect leader of the Flying Kill sect. The current sect leader, Flying Killing Yama's guest, was a man who had reached the age of 60. Although he was older compared to the active members, his skills were truly unrivaled, allowing him to firmly maintain his position as one of the 4 great assassins for over 20 years. Yet, for his unique secret skill to be in the hands of this courtesan, Go-chan couldn't hide his surprise. He seemed to understand this courtesan's identity now. See, could it be? Flying Killing Yama's guest had a granddaughter. Her name was Ha Ki-rin. She was the only surviving blood relative after losing her entire family in an unexpected attack. Flying Kill sect leader poured everything into this remaining bloodline. So far, it was good. It was something that everyone could fully understand. The problem lied elsewhere. Is the sect leader in his right mind? All the assassins of the Flying Kill sect believed that Flying Killing Yama's guest would never pass on his sect leader position to his only granddaughter, because she was utterly unsuitable as an assassin. It was no exaggeration to say that the foundation of an assassin lies in cold rationality. However, that granddaughter was far from it. She was the embodiment of a personality disorder. Her foul language that didn't match her pretty and young age, her extreme misophobia, her anger management issues, nothing was suitable for an assassin. Everyone opposed it. The last time he saw her was 4 years ago. It was before he retired, but when the executives and all the assassins of the Flying Kill sect protested, Flying Killing Yama's guest forcibly confined her in the Baizaldong, saying he would set her straight. It's impossible. Everyone was convinced that it was absolutely impossible to set her straight. How could he possibly control her fiery temper and make her possess the cold rationality of an assassin? With that, he had forgotten about her. It had been 4 years since he retired, so she would have grown into a proper woman at the age of 19 by now. Proper, just looking at her impressive breasts that could be grasped, it was evident. She had indeed grown up splendidly. With such an alluring face, anyone would easily fall for her unless they were exceptional. At that moment, she extended her hand towards the wall of the private room. Seuk! The needles embedded in the wall were pulled out and attached to the bracelet on her wrist. Seeing this, it was clear that it was indeed Flying Killing Yama's guest's unique secret skill, the lustrous jade flying needles. Her using this meant she had inherited the sect leader position. Then does that mean she succeeded in the 100 days, 100 kills? To become the sect leader of the assassin sect of Flying Killing, there was a rite of passage. It involved taking a test called the 100 days, 100 kills. The 100 days, 100 kills required completing 100 designated requests within 100 days. If one achieved this, they would be called one of the 4 great assassins. Impossible. Given her temperament, it was doubtful she could have accomplished this. Or did the former sect leader truly succeed in raising her into a proper assassin? Perhaps that could be the case. Come to think of it, it was also surprising that she, with her severe misophobia, was enduring and serving alcohol among the prostitutes. Was there room for rehabilitation? If that were the case, the former sect leader might become admirable. After all, he had managed to raise that personality-disordered individual into one of the 4 great assassins. Then a small voice reached his ears. Oh my, damn it! He saw Ha Ki-rin, disguised as a courtesan, wiping a small drop of blood from her cheek. She had a cold gaze, as if displeased. Seeing her like that reminded him of her younger days when she used to swear. Is she really fixed? As he was feeling doubtful, she approached him. Approaching him, she pulled out one of the needles embedded in his chest. Then, a cough escaped from Go-chan's mouth. Cough, cough. The fact that his voice came out seemed to indicate she had removed the needle blocking his vocal cords. Ha Ki-rin sat on the table, crossing her exposed, smooth legs, and said, I never expected to see a retired person like this. Uncle Go-chan. Or should I call you former low-rank assassin? No, 83. Damn it. It was indeed Ha Ki-rin. He thought she would have forgotten since it had been 4 years, but she remembered him just from the few encounters they had. Go Chan parted his lips with a tense voice. "It's been a long time, young lady." "Sect leader." "Pardon?" "I'm the sect leader now." He had been skeptical, but his conjecture was correct. She had become the current sect leader of the Flying Killing. As this fact was revealed, Go Chan was overwhelmed by a sense of unease. The reason was simple. When a retired assassin meets an assassin from their former assassin group, it usually means death. As he was feeling anxious, Ha Kirin said, "Is it because you retired that you don't see me as a sect leader?" "And no, how could that be?" "Congratulations on becoming the new sect leader." "HMMPH, kneel and receive my blessings." At the thick curse that flew out of her mouth, Go Chan was at a loss for words. No matter how he looked at it, she was exactly the same as he remembered her. Even before, it didn't suit her pretty face to utter such profanity. Ha Kirin covered her lips with her hand and said, "Oh my, look at me. I must have become too comfortable meeting someone I know after a long time. I should put on some airs and such, but a curse slipped out without me realizing it. Please feel free to be comfortable." "How can I do that? A lady should have manners." What manners at this point? He thought that inwardly but kept his mouth shut. Of course, he didn't have the courage to say it out loud. Rather, he became even more tense. He didn't know what words would come out of her mouth. At that moment, Ha Kirin parted her red lips. "Someone might think I came here to kill you." "Grandfather also cherished you too, allowing you to retire together with Uncle Gam. So relax." "Is that true?" Go Chan asked with wide eyes. He had been worried that she might be after his life. But if she said that, it seemed there wouldn't be any significant problems. Phew, he felt relieved. But suddenly he also found it strange. If she wasn't after him, why did the new sect leader personally appear here and use the lustrous jade flying needles on him? As he was puzzled, Ha Kirin said with a smile, "It's a good thing." "Pardon?" "What was a good thing?" "I was planning to enter and leave Yon Mok Sword Manor through the eldest young master, who I heard enjoys wine and women. But I can go in together with you, escort guard Go Chan." For a moment, Go Chan furrowed his brow, wondering what she was talking about. Why did she want to enter Yon Mok Sword Manor with him? What do you mean by that? Why would you enter Yon Mok Sword Manor with me?" At that question, Ha Kirin slightly lifted Go Chan's chin with her fingertip and spoke in a murderous voice. "I'm thinking of taking the head of the third young master of Yon Mok Sword Manor." Chapter 39, Dangerous Visit 2. "I need the head of the young master you serve." At the words of Ha Kirin, the Flying Killing sect leader, escort guard Go Chan was momentarily speechless. He had wondered what purpose she had for entering Yon Mok Sword Manor, but this was truly bewildering. What do you mean by that?" "It's exactly as you heard. I'm going to take the head of the one called Mok Jong-un." Go Chan's mind became complicated. There were a few rules for assassins. One of them was that as long as they belonged to an assassination sect, murder without a request was prohibited. That applied even to the sect leader. Go Chan swallowed his dry saliva and asked, "Did you receive a request?" "No." "Pardon?" At her quick answer, Go Chan furrowed his brow. She came to take Mok Jong-un's head without receiving a request. What was this about? To the puzzled Go Chan, Ha Kirin twirled her hair and said, "A piece of information came in from someone in Yon Mok Sword Manor." "Information?" "Intermediate assassin, no. 29. Thump. At that moment, Go Chan's heart raced. Intermediate assassin, no. 29. Senior brother Gam. It was the assassin number of Gam Ilchung, his senior brother. Touching the chin of the stiffened Go Chan, Ha Kirin said, "I heard that assassin, no. 29, no. Uncle Gam was killed by Mok Jong-un, the third young master of the Mok family." It was unexpected. To think that the third young master of the Mok family, a mere third-rate, killed a first-rate master who was once a skilled intermediate assassin of the Flying Killing sect. But there's something even more puzzling. As far as I know, Uncle Go, you were Uncle Gam's junior, so why are you still by Mok Jong-un's side? At her question, Go Chan was at a loss for words. It was extremely awkward to answer. If he said he had submitted to him, Even though he was retired, she might harm him for turning a blind eye to the death of a former fellow disciple. But if he kept his mouth shut, he would also find himself in an unfavorable situation. Damn it. After a moment of deliberation, Go-chan barely parted his lips. I had no choice but to wait for an opportunity. Opportunity? Since it's been quite some time since I retired, my skills weren't sufficient to immediately deal with the mock family fellow who killed my elder brother. At Go-chan's words, the suspicious Ha Ki-rin grinned. Then, placing her hand on Go-chan's shoulder, she said, "As expected of Uncle Go, I knew it would be like that. No matter how retired you are, how could an assassin of the flying killing sect submit to the enemy and turn a blind eye when his own elder brother was attacked?" It felt like a dagger was flying and piercing his chest. However, for Go-chan to escape this situation as much as possible, this was the only way. Although she was young, if she had become the sect leader and inherited the title of Flying Killing Yama's guest, her martial prowess would be at least at the peak realm or above. If he couldn't run away, he had to use his head. How could that be? My senior brother cherished me so much. He was so cherished that he was interrogated to the point of torture, had 2 fingers cut off, and was treated with such affection. So even if he died, he had no desire for revenge or longing. However, these words seemed to have an effect, as Ha Ki-rin nodded her head and then, tuck, 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 she removed the needles embedded in his chest. As the needles were removed, his stiffened body moved, and he could breathe properly instead of taking half-breaths. Ha! Don't feel too bad. I needed to verify whether Uncle Go had submitted to the young master of the mock family or if there was another reason. Silently regulating his breathing, Go-chan asked her, "But young lad, no, sect leader." "Yes. This isn't a matter that requires the sect leader to personally intervene, so why?" "Why? Pardon? Is there a reason I can't personally intervene?" "And no, how could that be?" There was no reason she couldn't. It was just a bit puzzling that someone who had inherited the title of Flying Killing Yama's guest, one of the 4 great assassins, would personally intervene in a matter related to a retired assassin, not even a top-tier request. Of course, considering her temperament, it could have been a whim. Ha Ki-rin grinned at Go-chan and said, "Since we're at it, let's depart for Yon Mok Sword Manor." Seeing her enthusiastic demeanor, Go-chan's complexion darkened. I have to let him know somehow. Otherwise, his life might truly be in danger. Pack, pack. Mok Jeong-un, practicing the stepping technique, the foundation of body tempering techniques, for nearly 3 hours. Although it had only been 4 days since he started proper martial arts training, at a glance, his posture was as precise as if he had practiced for several years. Watching Mok Jeong-un, Chun Gryong clicked her tongue. What kind of fellow is this? He was training martial arts independently through self-study. She had thought he would ask for her help to some extent, but there was none of that. Yet he had already achieved such mastery. It's astonishing. Even when she was alive, she had seen countless martial talents. But this type was a first. Usually, when starting martial arts, one practices basic forms. Forms are a type of shape, and when these forms are connected, they develop into a complete technique. Therefore, mastering forms is important. The reason for repeating the same posture is to make it familiar to the body. In the gang-ho, life and death confrontations are frequent. In such moments, the outcome is often determined in an instant. Because one cannot calculate many things in that instant, the outcome can be completely different depending on how familiar the body is. Therefore, martial artists continuously repeat postures during training. However, except for the first time he assumed the posture, he never made a mistake from the second time onward. Mok Jeong-un's posture had not the slightest deviation. He repeated that posture dozens of times over 3 hours without the slightest error. This was possible because 2 conditions were met. With his unbelievable memory, his body is embodying it exactly based on that memory. It was no exaggeration to call this miraculous. Even if one remembers it in their head, physically reproducing it is a separate issue. Yet this fellow can do it. He can move his body accurately as he has learned or intended. There is almost no margin for error. There were sections where he needed to repeatedly adapt because the necessary muscles for some movements were not developed, but otherwise long-term training would be meaningless. Phew. The smoke thickened. The tobacco in the pipe kept burning. Watching this fellow, the desire to teach him something continuously arises. However, she suppressed that. Only those who are qualified can learn her techniques, and in any case, he had already obtained the 8 forms of thought destruction, which could be considered the supreme enlightenment. That alone could be considered immense fortune. Pa Pak, Mok Jong-un, who had been stepping through the body-tempering postures, finally adjusted his stance and regulated his breathing. Phew! How long are you going to keep doing this? Chengryong spoke to him. That's because the sun, which had been high in the sky, was about to set. Is that so? After dealing with escort guard Gam and obtaining the body of outer hall master Sang Ung-beek through Ma Seung, Mok Jong-un, whose movement had become somewhat free, had been immersed in martial arts training for 4 days after obtaining the basic techniques of Yon Mok sword manner. In the first place, his purpose here was martial arts, so he was devoted to it. The conditions are favorable. It was the best, as he wasn't even disturbed. Of course, Mok Jong-un presumed that this wouldn't last long. The moment the forge master's breath ceased, it would likely be a series of troublesome events. Leaving at an appropriate time wouldn't be bad. After all, he had already obtained the martial arts. There was no need to stay here any longer. In any case, he had only one goal. Crunch. To make a wine cup from the skull of the bastard who killed his grandfather and place it on the ancestral altar. Mok Jong-un said with a bright smile, "Then shall we go in and have a meal?" At those words, the corners of Chengryong's mouth twitched upward as if she had been waiting. Munch, munch. Across from Mok Jong-un, who was holding a book, a young maidservant was sitting and immersed in eating. The young maidservant ate the braised pork and drank from a wine cup, showing a happy expression. Gulp. This taste is the best. Watching the young maidservant, Mok Jong-un chuckled. With that, the young maidservant refilled the wine cup and said, "What are you laughing at? You seem to be enjoying it a lot. One of the 3 joys of the living is eating. Someday, even you, mortal, will realize that this world is good even if you roll in a shit field." The young maidservant was none other than Chengryong, who had possessed her. Every mealtime, she would enter the body of the maidservant who brought the food. For 4 days, this had been her joy. Tuck, 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 tuck. The problem was that it didn't last long. Chengryong, who had taken over the young maidservant's body, looked at the back of her hand holding the wine cup and clicked her tongue. Tusk, tusk. The veins were turning black and bulging out. An ordinary body couldn't withstand her ghost, which had ascended to the level of an Imimangnyang entity. 4 days ago, she had tried to obtain any body, entering the body of a pretty young maidservant to endure it, but that maidservant nearly died. This one can't even endure for a moment. Just bear with it a little, until a suitable body appears. Hurry up and find one for me. At her words, Mok Jong-un smiled. In fact, he had no intention of finding her a body right away. Chengryong, who was of a high level and could always stay by his side, was his trump card. Don't nag. Yes, yes. By the way, you're too interested in exorcism techniques, because it's interesting. The book Mok Jong-un was reading was an exorcism manual called the 6 People Spirit Summoning Technique, which the deceased diviner Sak had possessed. Mok Jong-un had asked to bring all of Sak's belongings. He had obtained many useful items, more so than from the diviner Myosin. There were several talisman techniques and a considerable number of related talismans. These were enough to pique Mok Jong-un's interest. There are quite a few interesting techniques here. For example, the dead flinch. Mok Jong-un furrowed his brow and turned his head to the side. At Mok Jong-un's attitude, Chengryong said with a glint in her eyes, "You've really become sensitive." At those words, Mok Jong-un closed the book and rose from his seat. Half a quarter ago, in escort guard Go Chan's room, Go Chan brought a set of clothes to Ha Ki-rin. These are the clothes worn by the young maidservants. Slightly lifting and examining the clothes he had brought, she muttered with a chuckle, "So tacky. The courtesan clothes are better." Go Chan glanced at her. He had to let Mok Jong-un know about this somehow, but she hadn't given him a chance. Then, as a last resort, he thought of the maidservant's clothes. He intended to secretly go to Mok Jong-un and inform him of this fact while she was changing clothes. Go-chan slightly bowed his head and said, "Sect leader, I will step out for a moment while you change clothes." "Why, don't you want to watch?" How could that be?" "It's a rare opportunity to see the bare body of someone with a figure like mine." With those words, she slightly revealed her cleavage. Ahem. Her mischievous behavior was still the same. Even though she was still like this, the fact that the former sect leader had passed on the sect leader position to her showed how remarkable he was. Go-chan bowed and waved his hands, trying to leave. To him, Ha Kirin said with a smile, "Uncle Go, thank you. Thanks to you, I was able to enter here easily." At those words, Go-chan felt bitter inwardly. It wasn't a situation to be thanked for, as he had let her in half forcibly, regardless of his will. "No, it's nothing. Then I'll step out." Before he could finish his sentence, puck, needles embedded in the numbing acupoints. They were the Yongin flying needles. Go-chan looked at her with a perplexed gaze. Ha Kirin smirked and lowered her right hand, which was wearing a bracelet. Then, approaching him, she opened her mouth. "There's no need for that. What is the meaning of this? Your role ends here, uncle?" "Pardon?" "I said it ends here." "Be but sect leader? Did you really think I believed that foolish excuse you made?" "Ha!" "Oh no," Go-chan bit his lip tightly. From the beginning, she hadn't believed his words at all. She had merely used him to easily enter without triggering the defensive net of Yon Mok's sword manner. The fact that you obediently remained under the person who killed your senior brother naturally means you submitted. What nonsense is a retired piece of trash spouting about enduring for the sake of revenge? HMPH. Ha Kirin scoffed at Go-chan. At her laughter, Go-chan gritted his teeth. Seeing her unchanged personality disorder, his teeth ached. How did she pass the 100 days, 100 kills, and become the sect leader of the flying, killing sect? It was questionable. Suddenly, Go-chan furrowed his brow and opened his mouth. Could it be that you're in the midst of the 100 days, 100 kills? To become the sect leader of the assassin sect, flying, killing, there was a rite of passage. It involved taking a test called the 100 days, 100 kills. At his question, Ha Kirin silently curled the corners of her mouth. It was a sign of affirmation. No wonder something felt strange. It was odd for her, in the position of sect leader, to personally handle such a matter. If she weren't carrying out the 100 days, 100 kills, there was no way she would directly intervene in such a matter. Ha Kirin, who had been smiling with the corners of her mouth raised, said, "But you're not a complete idiot, I see." "That's right. The 60th sacrifice of the 100 days, 100 kills is none other than Mok Jong-un, the third young master of Yon Mok's sword manner." Go-chan was drained by his own powerlessness. Since when had things become so tangled? Everything had turned into a mess after that fake Mok Jong-un appeared. No, was it because he was so weak that he couldn't even escape being a second-rate at this age, being swayed back and forth and ending up like this? At that moment, Ha Kirin drew the dagger from Go-chan's waist. What are you doing?" In response to that question, she smirked and said, "Uncle, you killed the young master you served for the sake of avenging Uncle Gam and then committed suicide. Got it?" From the beginning." Tack. Ha Kirin sealed even Go-chan's fatal acupoints. Then, placing her index finger on her lips, she whispered, "Be quiet. You should be grateful that I'm saving your honor as a member of the flying, killing sect, even though you're retired." With those words, Ha Kirin tried to slit Go-chan's throat. It was at that very moment. Pat. Wirrick, the dagger in her hand, escaped and flew through the door screen. Pack. Through the pierced door screen, someone could be seen holding the dagger. At this, Ha Kirin's eyes widened. "Oh, a bystander, Quang." While she was astonished that someone kicked open the door and revealed himself, it was none other than Mok Jong-un. "Escort guard Go-chan, were you in danger?" For the first time, Go-chan thought this devilish fellow looked cool. Chapter 40, Dangerous Visit 3. Despite her fiery temperament, Ha Kirin had undergone rigorous training and education under flying, killing Yama's guest, one of the 4 great assassins of the Central Plains. The essence of assassination lies in gathering information and preparation. Therefore, she began investigating her target, Mok Jeong-un, in various ways. However, upon investigation, this Mok Jeong-un was no different from a naive young master. She had heard that his martial arts were so poor that he was considered third-rate, not even acknowledged by the other brothers or retainers of the Yon Mok sword manor. But how did such a fellow kill the 29th mid-level assassin? There were two possibilities she could surmise here. One was that the real culprit could be someone else. The person who leaked this information to them was from the same Yon Mok sword manor, but he was another young master who had to compete for succession. It was entirely possible. And secondly, did he hide his true abilities for this day? She considered the latter less likely than the former. This was because he was only 17 years old, and if he had to compete for succession, there was no reason for him to hide his strength. The fact that the Yon Mok sword manor master was suffering from an illness was a recent development. Thus, she was even more certain. This is completely unexpected. Ha Kirin momentarily doubted her eyes. Although born a woman, she had reached the pinnacle of martial arts through her grandfather's unwavering support and teachings. Even she could not perform the void-seizing technique. Yet, the 17-year-old naive young master of the Mok clan, whom she had regarded as an ignorant child, was capable of this. Ha Kirin's eyes narrowed as she looked at Mok Jeong-un. But why? If he possessed profound internal energy to the extent of being capable of void-seizing, he should have reached at least the pinnacle stage of the transformation realm. However, no matter how she sensed his aura, he seemed to be merely third-rate. It was exactly as she had heard. Strange. He demonstrated void-seizing, yet his aura was third-rate, but the atmosphere emanating from him was uncannily ominous. Perhaps that was why she couldn't gauge him at all. It was possible that she couldn't sense it because he had concealed his energy. "Yo, young master." At that moment, the guard Go Chan called out to Mok Jeong-un in a voice close to relief. It was understandable, as he would have lost his life with his throat slit if it had been a bit later. However, the crisis was not over. "Pak, Hyuk." Ha Kirin grabbed Go Chan's throat and pulled him towards her. The startled Go Chan tried to twist his body to break free, but he couldn't resist due to the significant difference in their internal energy levels. Holding Go Chan, she spoke to Mok Jeong-un. "If you don't want to see your bodyguard die, I advise you not to move, young Master Mok." At her words, Go Chan let out a faint sigh. That was because Ha Kirin knew nothing about that fellow. Although he had just saved his life, that fellow was not the type to dance to someone else's tune in the first place. Then Mok Jeong-un opened his mouth. "Who are you?" To this question, Ha Kirin laughed and said, "There's no reason for me to tell you that, young master. Rather, I would like you to take a step back." She was keeping Mok Jeong-un in check. If it weren't for the void-seizing technique he had just displayed, she wouldn't have been this cautious. However, she needed to prepare for the worst-case scenario. It was difficult to gauge Mok Jeong-un's exact martial arts level, and at this point, a normal assassination was already out of the question. Should I retreat? As she pondered this, she felt the throat she was holding tremble slightly. She noticed Go Chan moving his lips. At this, she tightened her grip on his throat even more. "Quack, kek. Old man Go seems to be intent on harboring animosity towards us, seeing as you're even doing this kind of thing." At those words, Go Chan found it absurd even in the midst of his suffering. It was ridiculous to hear her babble about animosity when she was the one who had tried to kill him first. "An assassin from the flying killing sect. Ho, so you were an assassin?" Uruk at Mok Jeong-un's words, she made an annoyed expression. He had nicely summarized and exposed her identity. Ah, this damn bastard. There was nothing worse than an assassin failing and having their affiliation revealed as well. Now that things had come to this, she had to kill Mok Jeong-un in some way. No, the goal was to kill him even if she had to retreat and change her approach. Once designated as a 100-day 100-kill target, if she couldn't kill him, she wouldn't be able to receive the title of the 4 Great Assassins or become the society leader of the Flying Killing Sect. Do I have to finish it? Although she still couldn't be sure of Mok Jeong-un's martial arts level, she did have a secret technique as a last resort. It was the extreme killing needle attached to her wrist. Since it was specially made, it could only be used once, but if used within a distance of 3 jang, even skilled martial artists would find it difficult to block with their protective kai. She was told to use it when her life was in danger, but it might not be a situation to hold back. If I let my guard down, I could be the one to suffer. Without lowering her guard, she slowly lowered her left hand. At this, Mok Jong-un spoke. Let him go. What? If you release the guard, Go-chan, I'll let you go this time. It's very rare for me to let someone who targeted my life go. What? Go-chan was inwardly surprised. He didn't expect that devilish fellow to let an assassin who had come to take his life go for his sake. Wasn't he just a pawn to be used by that guy? He thought he would naturally be abandoned, so it was truly unexpected. Just let him go. Ha. On the other hand, at Mok Jong-un's words, one of Ha Ki-rin's eyebrows arched upward. His attitude, as if bestowing mercy, was annoying. However, she also thought it was rather fortunate. The fellow had made a mistake. The fact that he was willing to let go of an assassin who had targeted his life to save a single bodyguard was proof that he didn't take Go-chan lightly. Still holding Go-chan's throat, she took a step back and said, Young Master Mok, it seems you care a great deal for your bodyguard. No. Not particularly. It's just my whim that I don't want to let a useful person like Guard Go-chan die right away. Whim? HMPH. Scoffing, she said to Mok Jong-un. Well then, if you want to save this person's life according to your whim, move back 10 steps and kneel down. Then, I'll release the bodyguard as soon as I leave the estate. As she spoke, she used the hidden angle to switch the trigger on her wrist and loaded the extreme killing needle. She had already visualized the unfolding situation several times in her mind. The moment Mok Jong-un stepped back, she planned to use Go-chan as a shield and push forward, firing the extreme killing needle from her hidden angle. Hurry up and step ba! It was at that very moment. She discovered that Mok Jong-un's gaze was not directed at her but slightly behind her. At the same time, flinch, sensing something strange behind her back, she hurriedly switched her wrist and shot the spectral needle. Poof, 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 pook. However, there was nothing behind her. What? She was sure she had felt something approaching from behind just now. It was an eerie sensation, but what on earth? Pack. Kek. In an instant, she grabbed Go-chan, whose throat she was holding, and twisted her body to one side. At that moment, a dagger brushed past her right side. Seeing Ha Ki-rin's appearance as she dodged, Mok Jong-un's eyes gleamed with interest. Faster than Mok Yuchen, and more sensitive in perception. Chen Gryong, who had targeted Ha Ki-rin's back, spoke. The senses of a peak-level expert are incomparable to those of a first-class martial artist. My ghostly aura is too strong, so it's not easy to approach within 1 jang. It seems so. Throughout Mok Yuchen's narration, he kept glancing at Chen Gryong's location from time to time. Upon reaching the peak realm, it seemed that one becomes more adept at manipulating energy, to the point of being sensitive even to spiritual energy. Then, Ha Ki-rin spoke to Mok Jong-un with sharpened eyes. Young Master Mok, you had an accomplice. She was certain. The eerie and unfamiliar sensation she had felt from behind. She didn't know what it was, but her senses couldn't be wrong when she was already on high alert, and she realized one thing. It was weak. The dagger Mok Jong-un had thrown earlier was a surprise attack, but the force behind it was weak. If a martial artist above the peak level had thrown it with intent, she would have been hit on the shoulder in that fleeting moment. Something was strange. It was a perfect opportunity, yet he let it slip. Could it be? Perhaps the void-seizing technique he had demonstrated earlier was not Mok Jong-un's skill. It could have been the help of this unfamiliar entity that couldn't be sensed. As her thoughts reached this point, the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. If Mok Jong-un was not the kind of expert she should be wary of, she could definitely kill him. Extreme killing needle. In a split second, killing intent rose from her. Sensing this, Mok Jong-un spoke in a cold voice. It seems you'll become the most wicked person. No, not at all. With those words, Ha Ki-rin pushed Go-chan towards Mok Jong-un as she was. Papa, papa, pack. and as she approached within 3 jang, she struck Go Chan's back with her left palm. Pa-ang! A sound of something exploding rang out. Kek! The extreme killing needle that penetrated Go Chan's back flew accurately towards Mok Jeongun's forehead. The power of the extreme killing needle flying at a tremendous speed was at a level that could pierce through the protective kai of decent internal energy experts. However, the flying extreme killing needle twisted its trajectory upwards and penetrated Mok Jeongun's raised right palm. Pook! Ha Ki-rin's eyes widened. The flying extreme killing needle changed its trajectory. What on earth was happening? As she was puzzled, she heard a woman's voice in her left ear. You should have left when he said he'd let you go, foolish one. Startled by the voice right next to her, she leaped to the right and shot the spectral needle. However, there was nothing there. Poof, 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 pook. She was sure she heard a voice right beside her, but why couldn't she see anything? As she was bewildered, something pulled her body to the ground with immense force. Pak, quang! Ack! A final scream burst out from Ha Ki-rin's mouth as she hit the ground. The startled Ha Ki-rin circulated her energy and tried to gather as much internal power as possible. Then she tried to generate a repulsive force to shake off the power pressing down on her body. However, Hyok! At that moment, an unbelievable thing occurred. Bubble, bubble. The surroundings of Ha Ki-rin, who was pressed against the ground, were filled with rising blood, and everything turned red. At the same time, a foul stench of blood filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Faced with this bizarre situation she had never experienced before, she couldn't understand what was happening. K-Kadyuk? K-Kadyuk? For a moment, she doubted her eyes. Dozens of red hands emerged from the ground, grabbing and pulling at her arms and legs, making her heart feel like it would burst. It was so terrifying that she couldn't even scream. Squirm, squirm. All she could do was twist her body. Looking at Ha Ki-rin like this, Chen Gryong sneered. Since it's the body I'll be using, I'll try not to leave too many scratches. She was enjoying this. Watching Chen Gryong, who was delighted, and Ha Ki-rin, who was suffering from fear, Mok Jeongun shook his head. I told you you'd be the most wicked person. He had clearly warned her. He had even given her a chance to live by holding the guard Go Chan's throat and threatening him. However, in the end, she had missed this opportunity. Cough, cough. Mok Jeongun examined Go Chan, who was turning bluer and colder, with blood filling his mouth. Blood continuously flowed from his pierced chest, and it seemed his heart had been penetrated, leaving no hope. Looking at him, Mok Jeongun spoke in a dry voice. What a pity! I thought we could have been together a little longer. He had done his best to save him, but he was really unlucky. Mok Jeongun looked down at the dying Go Chan and continued, You've worked hard. I won't forget guard Go Chan's efforts. Cough, young master, I don't want to die. Go Chan muttered something with difficulty. It was the intense desire to live of a dying human being. Mok Jeongun stared at him indifferently and said, Your attachment to life is strong. Cough, cough, please. As Go Chan's eyes gradually became hazy, Mok Jeongun looked down at him and muttered, his lips twitching. There might be room for us to be together a little longer. With those words, he took something out from his waist. Something was written in red ink, but Go Chan's vision was getting blurry, making it difficult to see clearly. Mok Jeongun placed that talisman on Go Chan's forehead. Then, placing his palm on Go Chan's chest, he said, According to the 6-person spirit summoning technique, vengeful spirits are born not only from strong resentment, but also from the overflowing resentment and death energy at the place of death. As soon as he finished speaking, a chilling and ominous energy surged from Mok Jeongun's palm. Goo-woo-woo.